Okay, so say that you are at a family ranch, right? Everybody's having a good time, and you guys are eating, having fun, and your children are there. But all of a sudden, you notice that one of your children is missing. And so you start looking for him everywhere, and you cannot find him. Recently, my mom was visiting from Mexico, and we were talking about scary stories and stuff. And then she's like, I cannot believe I have not told you what happened to your cousin in Mexico. Go on, tell me more, because I'm intrigued, right? If all this spooky stuff we're talking about. And she goes on to say that my cousin's in Mexico. Well, they live over there. And she has her son next to her, and all of a sudden she notices that he's not there. He just like disappears. So she's looking around frantically, like, where the hell did he go? Okay, and everybody else is there, her siblings and her mom and dad. Well, her son is nonverbal and he has a disability. So she starts panicking even more, right? So it starts getting dark and everybody's worried now, right? Because, I mean, there's animals out in the ranch. But the thing is that the ranch is like where they're at, it's like an open plain. So for him to just like disappear out of nowhere without anybody seeing where he went was kind of like scary and kind of just like, what the fuck, like crazy. So finally, my cousin finds him, right? But he is on a little cliff, and her first instinct is to like run and grab him because it looks like he's about to like jump off. But she said that he had his hands extended out, like with his palms up like that, and he was like reaching for something, but he wasn't crying, he wasn't scared. And she was like, what the fuck? Like, she would have thought like he would have been at least crying because it's getting dark, and I mean, mom is not around. So that happens, right? And everybody's so happy that he gets found. Fast forward to a couple days, weeks, I don't know time frame, but my cousin is out doing errands in the city, right? And so this man comes up to her and he's like, I have a message for you, is it okay if I tell you something? And at first she's like, what the fuck? She looks around and she's like, okay, go ahead. And so he says, your son went missing, right? And when you found him on a cliff. And my cousin's like, what the fuck? Like, yeah, He said, well, the message I have for you is that your son did not jump off the cliff because La Virgen de Guadalupe was there holding his hands. And she's like, okay, like, kind of like in shock. He said, when you grabbed him, you seen his hands, right? And the first thing you saw were the scratches on the top of his hands. And that was a key part that my cousin did not tell anybody. She didn't like even bring it up because I guess she was just like scared. Like, she had all these mixed emotions, right, that they had found him. But she remembers that she clearly saw those scratches on his hands. And the man goes on to say, well, those scratches are from the thorns that the Virgen de Guadalupe has on her roses. And she was holding him because the duendes had took him. Excuse me, the who? I guess he said that the reason that he vanished out of nowhere, right, when they were there, is because the duendes had lured him away and they actually were doing travesuras to him. And they wanted him to jump off the cliff or to, because they're known to create like chaos and do evil things like that, right? And if you know about duendes, you know that these little things are fucking scary. Like, it's not like your little troll movie with their colorful hair. Like, they're known to do like evil things and scary things, and they're known to take children. How fucking scary is that? And so my cousin is like tripping out, right? And he notices and he's like, okay, I'm sorry. I'll let you go on with your day. I just needed you to know. So when you go to the ranch, like, be careful, always have him close to you. This is just a message that I felt I needed to tell you, or it came across and I had to tell you. Excuse me? Like, what the fuck? I mean, yes, that is a miracle. Thank God. Like, nothing happened to him. But how fucking scary. Oh my God. Like, oh, I don't know. Like, think about it. Like, just out there chilling on the ranch, like away from people, having a good time. And then these fucking creatures are just like, oh, I shouldn't even call them that, right? Oh, I mean, these things are out there. But you know what I wanted to look into? I want to know if the like duendes only exist in Mexico or like they're all over. Like, are they here in the States, or is it something like only Mexican culture like believes in? Because I mean, I know that people are like, oh, causan travesuras, and they like will hide things from you and do things like that. But I'm like, Are they here in the States? Because that's even scarier. Like, to know that these little trolls are like running around. I don't know. I'm scared in the backyard. Anyways, let me know if your culture believes in this stuff. I thought that was spooky. It was beautiful ending to a scary story, but it was still very scary because, ugh, I mean, let me know what you think. And thank you so much for all the followers and all the love you guys always show me.
This is a story time from my cousin who was at the Christina Grimmie concert when she was unalived on stage. So she gave me permission to share her POV. So this is not from my POV, but I'm going to be telling it like it is, but you just know that it's my cousin's story. So I was 17 years old when I saw Christina Grimmie on stage for the very first and last time ever. I'd been watching her since I was a kid, like back in 2009, just when I was like 10 years old. I just remember using my mom's laptop to scroll on YouTube when I came across this petite little girl whose smile looked like it would never fade. The exact video that I saw was when she was singing the Miley Cyrus cover. I can't remember the exact song it was. And I remember being completely enamored because it was just this girl, her keyboard, her voice, and a dream. Basically, I grew up with her music. Like, her voice matured as I matured. So, like, I literally watched her from the time she was starting to post YouTube videos to the time that she went on The Voice to the very time that she went to Orlando for her very first concert. And I knew I needed to buy a ticket right then and there. I knew I needed to have a front row seat to her come up because I knew it was going to be big. So this concert took place in 2016 in Orlando, and I think she was playing with Before You Exit. I was on that like flies on shit. Fast forward to the concert, the plaza was not so huge, which honestly made it feel a lot more personal. The stage wasn't towering over us, we were all right there. When Christina came out, the crowd erupted. Like, this little girl who was once just a small YouTube creator posting her silly little songs on YouTube is now on stage being screamed at by hundreds of people. So the show itself was pure magic. I will never forget it in my entire life, for more reasons than one. The girl hit every single note to a T. And in between sets, she would even be like talking with us personally, which, like I said, was making the concert seem way more personal than a Beyonce set ever could. When the set was over, she announced that she would be meeting the fans at the merch table, which was not like an unusual type thing. Like, Christina was famous for loving and hugging and talking to all of her fans. She appreciated every last one of us. So the line began to form and it got really long really fast, and it was like snaking around the whole entire arena. We're all standing there waiting for our turn in line to get to Christina and say our piece with her, when all of a sudden it happened. And to be honest, it all happened so fast that it didn't even feel real. I had to do a lot of reflecting to like fully come to terms with what actually happened in my vicinity. So what happened was, the next person in line was this man, and Christina had opened up her arms to greet him. But instead of reciprocating her love and affection, and then a flash of metal and a deafening crack, everyone scattered. Ears were ringing as people were screaming. It basically turned into a big stampede. Honestly, it was turning into a crowd surge situation, and it was becoming extremely dangerous, even more dangerous than the guy with the pew-pew. I was only able to catch a small glimpse of what happened, and from what I could see, I saw her brother, Christina's brother Marcus, run at the man with the pew-pew. And then collectively we all heard another shot, and then silence from Christina. And she fell to the floor, and there was nothing any of us could do to stop it. Had somebody noticed the man standing there sketchily with the pew-pew in his hands before this incident happened, maybe we could have stopped it. And that's something that sits and haunts me every single day. Could I, or have somebody else in the crowd, saved Christina Grimmie from her horrifying end? So once we were all outside, we were all freaking out. It was just a fest of crying, snot dripping down our noses. We had all just experienced collectively a traumatic event together. We didn't know if she was alive or dead. We just know that we saw her fall to the ground. We heard silence from her. There were rumors spreading around here and there and everywhere. Remember, police cars swarmed the streets. But when the truth came that she hadn't made it, I felt like my heart was physically ripped from my chest in that very moment. Like, she wasn't just an artist to me. Like, I had watched this girl's come up. Do you understand? I've watched this girl's come up. I don't think you understand. I watched her from the very beginning of her YouTube career to the very end of her life. That hits you hard as a human being, with empathy and feelings. And it's been years now. I'm 26 years old now, and I physically can't even go to a concert. Even any kind of loud noise like a firework or firecracker gets my heart rate up. Like, I can't. This incident truly traumatized me to my core. And I hope that nobody has to experience anything like that. It was horrifying. And I can't even begin to imagine how horrifying it was for Christina herself, her brother, her mother, her family. That was the time that I went to Christina Grimmie's first and last concert and witnessed the end of her life. And I will always think about her. I will never forget Christina Grimmie. Thank you for listening to my story. So yeah, you guys, that was a story from my cousin. I'm not going to tell you her name. She told me to keep her anonymous, but she did give me permission to share her story with you. Yeah, let me know what you guys think. I think that's horrifying and a really terrible, traumatizing experience for her. And this is why she won't go to any concert with me ever in her lifetime, which I don't blame her. And rest in peace, Christina Grimmie. You were and always will be a legend.
So I have a spooky story for you, and this one's about a train coming out of New Mexico. Now this follows my series where I talk about haunted jobs, and if you guys have ever worked at a haunted job or a haunted location or done anything that attracts its fair share of ghosts, go ahead and send me a DM. Anyways, this one's about a train coming out of New Mexico. It's barreling down the tracks headed to some destination, and there's 2 engineers on the train and I think the conductor. Well, one of the engineers is looking down the track and he spots some kids on the railroad. There is no way they're going to be able to avoid the kids, but he signals for them to stop the train because obviously there's somebody on the tracks to make things worse. Yes, they are kids. Luckily, they do slow the train down and it does come to a stop, but not before hitting a kid who was on a red bike. Now, they do halt the train to a stop, but again, that kid is definitely underneath the train somewhere. And so all of the engineers, the conductors, get off and they're circling the train. Somebody calls the police arrive on the scene and they're helping them to investigate. And as this is going on, one of the engineers goes over to like a row of bushes that happen to be lining one side of the track, and it's really just kind of brambles, but he peeks down into the bushes and he notices that there is a body there. Now this body is of an adult man or something, so he signals the police to come over, and the police collect the body and they take it somewhere. But after that ordeal ends, everybody is still shaking because they still don't know what happened to these kids. But the police finally tell the men that those kids have a habit of being on the tracks, except they haven't been alive since the 1980s. And yes, they died because of a train accident where a train crashed into all of them as they were trying to cross. But as far as the body that was found in the bushes, they still have no answer for that. The conductor and the engineers kept it moving. Again, rough night. But anyways, let me know if you have any strange train stories. That was a mouthful. Drop it in the comments or send me a DM, and I will see you guys in my next video.
I got a really good one for you. One of my followers sent this story in to me and I can't wait to tell, especially because I'm kind of in this awesome wooded area on a trip. So nights here have been creepy enough on their own. And then she sent me this. So she and her family used to take long drives from Anchorage to Stewart, Alaska, pretty frequently. Now it's a beautiful trip, but it's also hours on isolated roads in dense forests and mountains. So one evening they're on their way home and darkness is setting in. The kids are in the back seat sleeping and she's in the passenger side and her husband is driving. They get into this area where it's dense woods on the left and mountains on the right. She said that there was nobody else on the road for the longest time. They did not have anyone come up behind them, nor did anybody pass them. All of a sudden they see this bright ball of light kind of off to the left and in front of them in the woods. The light was like a yellowish orange color, and at first they thought it might be a motorcycle, but then they quickly realized, no, this is deep into the woods. This is not coming towards them from a road. And then she said the one light turned into 2, and that one wasn't yellowish orange. This one was a blue color. Then those 2 all of a sudden became 3, and the third is a greenish color. And then there were 4, and this one was a purple color, kind of like a black light looks like. She said they were kind of like dancing around and darting through the woods, almost like they were playing and chasing each other. They were swirling around and darting around trees, and then they would join in and become one, and then they'd break off into 4 again. And all the while they kept staying kind of to the left and in front of them. As they drove, they almost followed them through. So she says that this keeps going on for like a good 15 minutes, but then all of a sudden the trees up ahead are starting to get a little more sparse and it's turning more into an open valley. And then she says they all come together and form one big orb, kind of pulsating red. She said as it was pulsating, it kept swelling larger and larger. And then she said all of a sudden it came rushing out of the woods towards them. And then it kept pace with them. And they're freaking out because they think this thing might hit them. But then they realize it's staying a good 30 feet in front of them, keeping their pace as they drive. And as they are driving towards it, as it's keeping their pace, they notice that it's getting bigger and then decreasing in size, and then pulsing bigger and then smaller, bigger, smaller. She says it does this for like 2 more minutes. She feels like it's like studying them or something. And then all of a sudden, it just rushes right to them and goes up over the van. And they said they didn't hear a sound. They didn't feel a flutter, nothing. Absolutely no indication that this thing whizzed by them. And then she said it circled back around into the woods, crosses the road, and goes up the mountainside. And then when it gets right to the top, it sort of disappeared. It was just poof, gone. She said that from the time it rushed them, went over the car, looped around, and disappeared above the mountain, it might have been 10 seconds total. And her husband are just in absolute shock, just looking at each other like, what in the heck? It was fascinating, scary, exciting, all at once. She said they had another 2.5 hours till they got home, and even into the next day, they were still in shock about it. She said they never saw anything like that again, but they want to know, what do you guys think? Like, are we talking aliens or some weird phenomenon that we don't know about, or ghost lights? I'm going to tag her in this, and I'm sure she'll be up in the comments, so let us know your thoughts. And if you're new here, definitely follow for more creepy story time.
This girl said that her uncle was attacked in Appalachia by something they cannot figure out. So when Kelly was 17 years old, her and her family decided to take a trip during the summer. They were going to visit family that lived in Appalachia. She didn't want to go at the time because she got invited to go on a vacation with her boyfriend, but her mom made her go anyway, and they planned to stay for about 3.5 weeks, 24 days to be exact. So while she was on the plane, she felt like there was this man staring at her, and it was really making her feel uncomfortable. She was sitting by herself, and her family was in the row behind her. She decides that she's just going to ignore it. So they finish the flight, she gets off the flight, and they land in Charlotte Douglas, North Carolina. They then drive to their family's cabin where her grandmother and uncle are staying at the time. Now, she said that her family's cabin was in Hursonville, North Carolina, but I looked that up so that I would pronounce the word correctly, and I did not find a Hursonville, I found a Hendersonville, North Carolina. So I think that's what it is. Well, they get to the cabin and everything there is normal, and they spend the rest of the day relaxing. Well, the next morning, her and her sister want to go get snacks. So they drive to the store, and they walk into the store, and they're looking for their snacks, and she notices in one of the aisles that she sees a man, and he looks very familiar, and she realizes it's the same man from the plane. Now, this seemed like a very weird coincidence to her, because if she remembers correctly, Hendersonville is about 2 to 2.5 hours away from Charlotte Douglas, North Carolina. But that's not even the weirdest part. A couple days later, her and her family, including her uncle, decide that they're going to stay home and make dinner. After they eat, they decide that they want to go on a hike, because at the time, her mom was very into flowers and gardening, and she wanted to go see the native nature there. As they're hiking, they see one other couple. They're about a mile and a half away from them, so they're essentially alone. Well, as she gets deeper into the trail, her and her family, they're about half a mile into the trail, she starts to get this really weird feeling. Now, she just decided that she was going to brush this off because she's always been very into nature, and she just wanted to admire the nature around her. But once they get about a mile in, at this point, the feeling is not going away. In fact, now it's getting stronger. Now, she notices that the deeper she gets into the forest, the feeling is just getting worse and worse. But they continue walking when suddenly they all hear something that startles them. It's this loud scream, and it sounds like it's coming from some type of man, and it sounds like it's coming from the right side of them in the forest, which doesn't make any sense because the trail is either in front of them or behind them. She said that although this did sound male, it did not sound human-like, and her family knew that something was trying to draw them deeper into the forest. So her family just starts to book it down the trail because they are scared at this point, and they run until they get to the parking lot, and when they get to the parking lot, they see the other couple. They ask the couple, like, hey, did you hear that scream? And the couple says yes, they heard it too. They're like, we need to get the hell out of here. So they jump in the car and they start driving away, and she said that as soon as they left the forest, her headache just went away. So they keep driving and they get home, and when they get home, they ask their grandmother if she had ever encountered anything like that before because she had grown up there. Her grandmother told her never to follow that noise because every Appalachian resident knows if you hear something, no you didn't. If you see something, no you didn't. Well, they all decide that they're just gonna go inside, they're gonna hang out and go to bed. So they go inside, they all go to bed that night, and around 2:35 in the morning, her uncle wakes up with a very itchy, sore back. Well, he's really tired at this point, and although it hurts, he decides that he's just gonna go back to bed. So he just goes back to bed. Well, the next morning he wakes up and he decides that he's gonna take a shower. He goes into the bathroom and he gets undressed, and he realizes that there's no soap in the bathroom. So he wraps a towel around his waist and he walks out of the bathroom into the kitchen to go ask if there's any soap anywhere, and her mother looks at him and just gasps. There are 3 large very deep scratch marks on her uncle's back. And they all know that they weren't there before because the night before they had all, after dinner, they had all went into the hot tub and he was in his swim trunks. And so they saw his back and he didn't have those scratch marks. So this happened in his sleep. The whole family at this point is freaked out. And these scratch marks were actually so bad that they had to take him to the ER to make sure that they weren't infected. They all jump in the car. They're driving to the ER. It takes about an hour to get there because of where they are. And they get to the ER. They get out of the car. His scratches are gone. Everyone in the family saw him walk into that kitchen and saw those scratch marks. They know that they were there and they were bad enough for them to take him to the ER. To give us an idea of what these scratches looked like, she said that they were very wide and deep. And so whatever this was that did this to him was bigger than him. At this point, they're like, okay, we've had enough. They literally booked a flight out that very night. To this day, they have no idea where those scratches came from. And she wants to know if you guys think that man had anything to do with this situation. I have no idea. I think it's super strange that there was a man on that flight and then there was the same man in the aisle of that store and that she was already weirded out about that man staring at her. Could have been like two separate weird instances, or it could have been connected. I have no idea. What do you guys think? I mean, I don't know that much about Appalachia, or at least I know from my research, I don't know as much as people from Appalachia know. So if anyone from Appalachia is in here, which I'm sure there are, if you have any thoughts, and anyone else who has any thoughts, of course, drop them below. But as always, please be respectful. I do want to say not every time, a lot of times when I tell these stories, weird shit happens to my phone. Like, my phone was on like 34% when I started the story, and I tell these stories really quickly, and normally it takes like 5% battery off of my phone, if that, when I tell these stories. And it dropped from 35 to 4 in 15 minutes, and I went to go put the charger back on my phone just now, and it dropped from 4 to 8 in like that. I mean, it rose from 4 to 8 like that. Also, could just be me freaking myself out because, of course, I tell these stories and I'm alone, and I don't know how I do it. I think I'm a little desensitized at this point. But then when those stuff like that happens, I get inside my head. So, yeah. Anyways, now I'm going to do my favorite part, which is the shout-outs. Oh, before I do the shout-outs, I do want to let you guys know something. My sleep schedule's fucked up. It's bad. Okay, it's 4:40 in the morning. I didn't just wake up. I haven't gone to sleep yet. And you know how I keep posting at like 7, 8 o'clock in the morning? Yeah, that's not me just posting because I woke up. That's me posting because I was working until 6 o'clock in the morning and then went to sleep at like 8:30 in the morning. I can't keep doing that. I like to be awake early in the morning and throughout the day. I don't know how I did this to myself. I've been overworking myself a lot lately, and I have to fix my sleep schedule. And the reason I'm telling you guys this is because it might mean that I don't post for a day or two, because I will have to I can't even talk, fix my sleep schedule. So that is why, if you guys don't see me post for like a day or two, that is why. FIFA Ladaculosis. Am I saying that right? I don't know. It'll be tagged in the comments. I tried. Thank you so much for your comment. I'm so glad that you like my stories and my community. That was the sweetest comment that you left. I loved that. I do have such an amazing community, and I'm so glad that you like everyone in the comments. I think that's what you meant when you said, I love the comments and I love your stories. And I really appreciate you being a part of my community and watching my stories and being kind and leaving kind comments and being positive. I love positive people. When people are positive, it just goes to show your confidence in yourself and just the type of person you are. And so I love having you here. Thank you so much for being here, and you're the best. I love you, girl. Adele Matias. I hope I pronounced your last name correctly, if that's your last name. Thank you so much for watching my stories. You said that you watch them before you go to work every single day, and I really appreciate that so much. I hope you hear this on one of the days that you're going to work and you're just listening to my stories and this pops up for you. I really appreciate you being a part of my community. I appreciate you being kind and leaving kind comments and supporting me and just It means so much to me. You guys have no idea how much you mean to me, really. So I hope you know as an individual how much I appreciate you and I love you. And thank you so much to both of you for being spooky babies. And with that being said, my name is Kaisa and I tell your paranormal experiences on here or ones that you recommend to me every single night. So if you're into that, hit that follow button. And I just need you to do 3 things for me. And what are those? Keep sending me your scary stories. Have a safe night. And what's the third one? Say it with me. Have a spooky night. Love you guys so much, my spooky babies. I'll see you in the next one. Spooky kisses and haunted hugs.
I just want you guys to know that I'm a nosy bitch. Like, I want to know all the drama. I just don't want to be involved in the drama. I found the perfect page because I stumbled upon a content creator that lets her followers send in anonymous secrets or things that could ruin people's lives. Today I'm going to share that with you. They're all in Spanish though, so I'm translating from Spanish to English. The title is What Secret Would Ruin Your Life? Just fair warning, I'm going to do one today, but like there's others that are not as intense as today's is gonna be, but if you like them, let me know and I'll translate more of them. If you know Spanish though, please go support this person. I'm gonna leave their name in the caption. So this person wrote in and says that this secret would not only ruin her life, but it would destroy her life. So turns out that her grandmother has always been really mean to her mom and her sisters. She would be mean to her as well, but she would just ignore her. Her grandmother would grab their clothing and burn them. She went as far as to spit in their food. One of her cousins that she was really close with would come and tell her mom and tell them, but nobody would believe them. And the mom would tell her husband and her husband would be like, you're crazy. My mom would never do anything like that. However, the few times that the husband would actually ask his mom if she had done anything like that, of course, the grandmother would deny everything. So she says that one day she reached her limit because she found out that her grandmother had put a whole bunch of bugs in her mom's food. Out of pure anger, she went around the house and she got all of the medicines that belonged to her grandmother. She crushed them all together and ends up putting all of these crushed pills in a coffee cup that her grandma drank every single day. She was the only one who would drink this coffee at the house. She doesn't know exactly what her intention was. She just knows that she acted out of impulse. It took about 2 days and she had a heart attack. It's unclear. She doesn't know if she had this heart attack because of what she put in her coffee, but her grandmother has been dead for a month now. She feels like it's her fault and she feels like she will be going to hell because of this. She doesn't think that she is a bad person, but she must admit that at the same time she feels like that's what was best for her family. What do you guys think? Let me know if you want to hear more.
Her son slept with a beat up mannequin head. Story time. Now, trigger warning because some of this is going to be weird and graphic. When I was a kid, I got babysat by this woman that we'll call Miss K. And she was really sweet. But Miss K had an adult son who lived with her. This man was so effing creepy. On this day, it was summertime. We were all out of school, so we got dropped off really early and we didn't go back to sleep. We all would just go outside and start playing. 4 or 5 of us kids are outside playing when we see this big deer coming through the woods. It's right on the yard line. It comes right up and it starts walking into the yard. But when we look a little closer, we start to realize this deer is wearing pants. Yes, it has a deer head. It's got antlers. It's a deer, but it's got a human body. It gets closer and it's making that deer sound. And when it gets right up to us, we all realize that's somebody wearing a deer head. Miss K's son had taken the deer head off the wall and cleaned out the skull and stuff, and he was wearing it on his head. He had straps on it so it wouldn't fall off. He shoved a deer call in the deer's mouth to his mouth where he could blow out of it, and he had deer hoofs on his hands. He was trotting around the yard on his hands and knees, wearing that big-ass deer head and those hooves, chasing the kids around. Yeah, the kids were terrified. They were scared as hell. They didn't know what this was or what was going on. Like, her son had this obsession with scaring us for some reason. It was weird. So we go in the house, and one of the kids tells Miss K that her son is out there wearing a deer head, and she said, oh, he does that all the time. Just ignore him. Another time, me and this little boy are in the living room. She had a floor model TV, and she let us watch cartoons. So we're laying on the floor in front of the TV, watching Bugs Bunny or something, when that little boy beside me starts screaming every breath. So because he's screaming, I'm looking in the direction that he's looking at the wall, and around the corner, we see somebody peeking, and they're wearing this scary mask, like a witch mask. It was creepy as hell. I could understand why he was screaming. So the little boy jumps up on the couch, covering his face with the pillow, crying, and I'm still laying on the floor, like, on my back. This K's son, he's crawling on all fours, making this noise, and he crawls right up to my face and gets nose to nose, and turns his head side to side like that. He just stares me eye to eye, and then he crawls backwards, still face to face, crawls out the room. And I just roll back over and start watching cartoons. Like, I don't know why I didn't tell my parents. I guess maybe because I grew up in a haunted house, that wasn't the worst thing I'd seen. I guess it wasn't scaring me as much as it did the other kids because I had been there longer and maybe I got used to it. He started doing that on a regular basis. Like, if you go to the bathroom, if you came out, you would see him wearing a scary mask peeking around the corner. Sometimes we'd be outside playing in her garden, like digging stuff up or planting stuff, and we'd look back at the house and we'd see her son standing at the kitchen window wearing that scary mask just staring at us. There'd be times where he would climb up a tree and just be perched up with that mask on watching us play. So one day all hell broke loose when Miss Kay had to go to town to get some groceries. She couldn't take all of us with her. She had a car, so she let her son babysit us while she was gone. There's like 5 of us kids sitting in the living room watching TV when 1 or 2 of the kids walk off. It was a boy and a girl, and they're gone for a few minutes. Next thing I know, I hear Miss Kay's son yelling, "Oh, y'all want to kiss? Y'all trying to make out? You think you're grown? Get in the kitchen." The rest of us get up and we walk to the kitchen, and he tells us to get out, so we go back to the living room. Like 40 minutes goes by, and he comes out the kitchen and says, "Don't none of y'all go in the kitchen. You stay in the living room," and then he goes to his room. I'm sitting on the couch. Remember, I'm like 7, and I can hear these kids like sniffling, but I don't hear them talking. Well, finally, Miss Kay comes back home, and she's got a carload of groceries, so she tells us to go outside and get the bags, and she wants to know where the other 2 kids are, so we tell her they're in the kitchen. We're out there getting the bags, and we can hear Miss Kay screaming from inside the kitchen, What the did you do?" Y'all, we run back in the house and we see that he's super glued this boy and girl standing face to face, hands to hands up like this, and they're stuck. They could kind of pull their hands apart, but they couldn't really because it hurt so bad. So Miss Kay grabs her son by the back of his hair, jerks him up, and mind you, he's an adult. And she drags him into the room, throws him in, and shuts the door. Like, you could tell he was scared of his mama. But Miss Kay comes over to me and says, "If he comes out of that room, I want you to grab my gun from behind my door and blow his damn head off. Do you hear me?" And I said, "Yes, ma'am." I wasn't going to say no. I was terrified. So she spends the next couple of hours trying to peel their face and hands apart with some hot water and a rag. Has me standing guard at the door with that gun. So she had this short hallway, but all over the walls was pictures of her family. And I mean, there were hundreds of pictures. I walked down that hallway a million times, never noticed anything, but this one day, for whatever reason, the picture stuck out to me. I noticed every single one of them has the eyes and mouths burned out, like someone had taken the pictures out of the frame and used like a wood burner or a cigarette and burned holes in the eyes and mouths, and then put the pictures back in the frames and hung them up on the wall. So it's like a wall full of people with no eyes and mouths. And I do remember telling my mom about it that evening, but it seemed like she didn't believe me. One day, Miss Kay was outside checking the mail or something, I don't know, but we were sitting at the table eating, and I had really long hair. It was in a ponytail, and her son comes walking up with a pair of sharp scissors and walks behind me and grabs my ponytail like he's going to cut my hair, so I pull back like out of his arms. And then he tries to pull it again, and I said, "No, don't touch my hair." And then Miss Kay came in, and she grabbed him by his arm and jerked him back and said, "I told you to leave her alone." He was always walking around me, like trying to rub my hair and stuff, and I would like flick him off, like, "Stop." Now looking back, I can tell he was kind of targeting me more. I don't know what the deal was, but Miss Kay always protected me, but she shouldn't have had him there in the first place because she knew something was wrong with him. Something was wrong with that whole family. And this is crazy. The more I talk about it, the more I have flashbacks of things I'd forgotten. So another time, she had this big basket of strawberries sitting on the freezer, and she told us we could eat them if we washed them. And he came in with this bowl of stuff. It looked like powdered sugar, and he told one of the other girls to dip her strawberry in it and eat it. And right before she started to do it, Miss Kay took the bowl out of his hand and dumped it in the trash. She then looked at her son and said, "What the hell is wrong with you? Get the fuck out of here." And he left. Now, her son had this old beat-up truck parked out front of her house, just an old drunk truck full of stuff, and the kids would go out there and play in it and dig around. So we're sitting on the grass near the truck, and 2 or 3 of the kids are in the truck plundering, and they come out with this thing, and when they walk up with it, it's like a switchblade, and they pop out the blade. And I said, "Whoa, put that back, like we're going to get in trouble." But one of the little boys that was holding it said, "Look, there's red stuff on it. You reckon he killed a deer?" And I said, "I don't know, put it back." Even though her son wasn't there, for some reason, I got this pit in my stomach, like I was really scared if we got caught, like we'd be in big trouble or he might would hurt us. One day, the kids was out there playing in his truck, and they found this like wrapped up engagement ring box. They opened it, and there was an engagement ring in it. Now, this guy never had a girlfriend, a wife, anything, but sitting there in the seat of that truck was an engagement ring. After seeing that, later the kids start asking Miss Kay, like, "Did your son ever have a wife or kids, a girlfriend, anything?" And she said, "No, he's never even had a girlfriend." And one of the kids said, "Well, there was an engagement ring in his truck." She said, "Where?" So they went and got the ring and brought it back to her, and she's just sitting there looking at it like, she said she never seen it before. She took the ring, I don't know what she did with it, but she told us he never even had a girlfriend, so I don't know why he had that ring. I remember one day, one of the dads came to pick up their kids, and they walked up to the porch, and she would never let the parents come in, like she would always stay on the porch and talk to them. So he was up there talking to her, and he was like, "I got some puppies out here. You're going to give them away for free. Do y'all want one?" And Miss Kay said, "No, we don't have no pets." Her son said, "No, I do want a puppy. Let me see them." And Miss Kay stomped her foot on the porch and said, "No, I said no pets. You know you're not allowed to have them." But I got the feeling it wasn't because she didn't like animals or didn't want a pet. I think it was because she knew he would hurt it. Yet she had us kids in the house around him, so I don't know. Oh, I remember one evening he slipped off and went somewhere, and when he came back, he had this young girl with him, and they came up to the porch, and Miss Kay came out and said, "No, you need to call your parents and go home." And her son was like, she's going to hang out here with us. And Miss Kay said, no, you're not allowed to have visitors, and you know that. So the girl ended up calling her dad, and her dad came and picked her up. She was a lot younger than him. Oh, and one day he was gone, and the kids went in his bedroom. And oh my God, I wish I'd never even went in there. He had magazines under his bed, and all the eyes and mouths had been like burned out, just like the ones on the walls. And there was like drawings on their faces. Basically, he was drawing wounds on these girls, like they'd been shot, stabbed. He also slept with this big mannequin head. There was no body, just the head, and his hair was all messed up. It looked like Cindy from Rugrats. It was all fucked up. He slept with that mannequin head every night, and he would walk with it around the house, holding it, like talking to it, trying to feed it and stuff, telling us it was his girlfriend. So it all came to a head one day when Miss Kay was in the back doing something, and one of our parents came to pick us up, and the parent managed to go in the house, and they seen some of the things that were in there and freaked the hell out. That little boy's daddy put all of us in his car and took us to our houses and talked to each and every parent and told them not to ever take us back. I was really upset that we couldn't stay no more. I loved Miss Kay. Now looking back, I'm thinking, what in the hell was going on in that house? Like, these people were crazy.
I was living in the Bronx with my cousin BB, and this particular day, my cousin wanted to go get a reading done by this lady named Anna who lived off of Hope Avenue, right? My cousin loves to get readings, and she would go to the botanicas and all that stuff. And I wasn't really into that stuff back then, but I love going to those places, right? So I'm like, hell yeah, I love to go. And she brought my brother. At the time, my brother was living there, Josh. And we both, all three of us went, So we go to this lady's house. Her name is Anna. Super nice lady, very hospitable. Lets us in, gives us water and something to drink. We sit on the couch, and Anna's typical apartment in, the Bronx. She has her little table in the back corner where she does her readings. I think at the time her daughter was home with their child. I think they lived there. And my cousin sits in the corner and starts doing the reading with Anna. And me and my brother are on the couch just kind of like minding our own business, like not trying to be paying attention to any of it. And I could kind of like, as I'm glancing over there, I could kind of see my cousin like saying no, or like, shaking her head or something to that effect, and but the living room was kind of a distance, so I really wasn't like listening. And I think there was like a TV on somewhere in the house, in the apartment, so you couldn't really tell what was going on. And I would say like 5-6 minutes into the reading, she pauses, and I remember she's, my cousin's like, no, none of this seems familiar. And the lady Anna was like, So she's sitting there and she's kind of looking, and then all of a sudden she gets up, walks away from her table, then walks back. And I'm like, what the hell's going on? So she sits back down and she starts trying to do the reading again. And the same thing. My cousin's like, no, this doesn't seem right, blah, 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 And my cousin has had readings with her before. No issues, right? Obviously, I mean, like, why would you go back if you've had an issue? So finally, Anna stops. She looks around and she looks at us, me and my brother. Me and my brother are in our own world. We're just talking, blah, 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 whatever, kind of whispering, because obviously they're trying to do a reading. Anna walks over and she says, which one of you two has a gift? And my brother's like, what? She's like, one of you two can see and talk to spirits. And my brother looks like this, like straight at me. And I'm like, I mean, he can sometimes, like, I thought I was in trouble. So I was like, he can sometimes see stuff, like not all the time. And he was like, yeah, but not like her. Like, this is her whole life, right? He's telling the lady. And I'm like, oh, you be a snitch, dog. Like, I was so mad. And the lady's like, can you see them or hear them and speak to them all the time? And I'm like, yeah, why? And she goes, okay, I need you to do me a favor. I need you to go to the other room because you're interrupting the reading. And I'm like, me? She's like, it's not necessarily you, it's your spiritual team is interrupting the reading. Like, I don't know if they want you to know some stuff, but I'm trying to do your cousin's reading and it's not working. So I'm gonna need you to go to the other room. And I was like, what? So she calls her daughter, and her daughter gets me. I say her name is Jessica. She's like, Jessica, come out here and get these two and put them in your room because they're interrupting, the girl is interrupting the reading and interfering, and I can't get a hold of the reading. I was like, okay. So we go into this girl's room with her daughter or son. I can't remember what it was. We're sitting there. I would say another 2-3 minutes go by. Same shit. So you hear Anna screaming, Jessica, Jessica. And the girl, what, Ma? Come here. She goes over there. She comes back. She's like, guys, you guys are going to have to go outside because apparently you're so strong that it's just like interrupting the reading for your cousin. So I'm sorry, you're going to have to sit in the hallway. I was like, is that even a thing? Apparently it is. Like, I've had moments, even me currently, I've had moments where I've done reading, I've gotten a reading, and a lot of the stuff that like my partner or, was going through would come up in my reading. So anyway, I was like, well, okay. And I sat in the hallway with my brother, and my brother's like, you always gotta be the weird one.
Guess what? I'm here to tell you about some carnival characters you, your parents, or even your grandparents may not have known about. In fact, some of these carnival characters are even extinct. So we're back. We're back with another Trini Paranormal, Trini Scary Story, Trini Folklore. But we're taking it a step further today. Since it's carnival, and we're going to talk about some traditional carnival characters that you may or may not have heard. So this first carnival character has been an integral character in Trinidad and Tobago, yet many of us do not know about it, and in fact, it is extinct. It is no longer seen in our traditional mass. It is the Negjadan. So this character actually started back with the French planters in their carnival masquerades and their carnival ball, and what they would do is that they would basically do a role reversal. They would reenact being a slave, and later on the liberated slaves played this character after emancipation, and it was a chance to mock their former enslavement and invert reality through parody. So usually this character was done by a male masquerader, and the costume usually comprised of a tattered straw hat, a colorful shirt tied with a bright big waistband, and knee-long trousers either rolled up or tattered at the ends. It usually represented an imitation of the costume of that historical figure. The second character you may or may not know about is the baby doll character. So basically, the baby doll character is a traditional character, often appearing with a bonnet and a little frilly dress, and she's usually carrying a baby doll. And this baby doll represents an illegitimate child. Often, the baby doll character would go around and she would accuse men, random men in the audience, of being the child father, and she would demand money to take care of the child or the infant. This traditional carnival character is actually very important because she not only mocked the upper class from colonial times, but she also highlighted, or her character also highlighted, the sexual exploitation of women of color who in colonial times would often be advantaged by those colonial overseers, and they would often fall pregnant with these illegitimate children. So this last character is called the minstrels. Very important character as well. The Trinidad minstrels were basically a direct descendant of the very racist minstrel bands or characters that was seen or very popular in the American South during Civil War. Essentially, in the American South, They were very racist. And the Southern minstrels were basically white men doing blackface. And their character would often be imitating free black slaves that they believed were too cheerful and they were simpletons. So they were basically parody characters that made fun of freed enslaved people. This character, that American South character, was introduced to Trinidad and Tobago. And of course, Trinidadians knew how to turn around an insult. And not long after, they transformed it from being blackface to being that whiteface character, or making themselves a spirited parody of like a white masquerader in Trinidad and Tobago Carnival. So let me know, did you all know about these Trinidad and Tobago traditional carnival characters? And if you made it all the way to the end, let me know if you want a part 2, because I could do a part 2 with some characters I'm sure all you still don't know about. Let me know. And happy carnival!
How do you shop at an antique store and not bring home the boogeyman? Easy. You listen to that little voice in your head and don't be like, oh, I don't get vibes or whatever. Yeah, you do. It's the same thing as like if somebody's following you and you get a weird vibe, or if like somebody steps around the corner, or if you see a dark alley and you think, maybe I shouldn't go down there. It's the same thing while thrifting. If you pick up something and your whole body goes, yuck, put it down. If you see a little doll laying over in the corner and the little doll's like, and then you get closer and the doll is all, set her back down. That being said, I do have some friends on here that specifically go out and look for that scary vibe, and you know what? You do you. I personally don't want a haunted doll in my house, but to each their own. But what if I can't pick it up? What if it's something heavy like a dresser or a table? Okay, then touch it. Touch it, and if your whole body goes, ugh, don't get it. I know all of you have been like, oh my God, check out this awesome table. It's typically like, $4,000 everywhere else, but it's 50 cents here. Awesome deal. Like, no, think too. If they're trying to give it away, if they're just like, oh, you can have it. It's fantastic. You can have it. Maybe be like, why? Why can I have it? If you look at a really old mirror and you think, oh, that's a cool mirror, and while you're looking at it, you feel something breathing on the back of your neck, be like, meh, no, you're gonna stay here. You cannot convince me that we are not all born with common sense to sense when something is not good for us, whether it's got something attached to it or it's just something that we don't need. We know. Even if it's new stuff, you're like, oh my God, I love that new purse, but it's cost so much money or whatever, I don't need it. Something tells you like, you don't need that purse, like relax. But then you've also got something being like, just get it. What if it sells out before you can get it? Get that purse. That's kind of the same thing. Like, right from wrong. You can tell bad from good. Just think while you're out thrift shopping. And if you find something like really good, don't tell me about it because I get FOMO real easy.
Did you know that one of the most catastrophic hospital failures actually occurred here in California, but most specifically in Sylmar, California? This specific hospital was caught on fire, then rebuilt. And then a 1971 earthquake of San Fernando tore it down, caused it to collapse, only to be rebuilt again. And if your answer was the Olive View Sanitarium, located here in Sylmar, San Fernando area, then you're absolutely correct. Let's get into the history and the tragic history, along with possibly a paranormal connection to this location. The Olive View Sanitarium opened its doors in 1920, and it was built to treat patients who were suffering from tuberculosis or TB. Before antibiotics, TB was a slow, lonely, and sometimes very painful death sentence, and patients were sent here for months and sometimes even years. And while TB was a big enemy with this hospital, it soon turned out to be natural disasters that would be the downfall of this location. Well, it started in 1962 with a horrendous fire called the Melody Fire. And this fire was nasty, it was quick, and it tore through much of the valley. It caused hundreds to evacuate. It swallowed whole buildings, even most of the hospital, and even neighborhoods around this area. And just when you thought everything was okay 8 years later, we were hit with the 1971 San Fernando earthquake. At approximately 6:01 a.m. on February the 9th of 1971, Sylmar would experience one of the most violent earthquakes. Many who were working here at that day, it seemed like Olive View Hospital suffered the worst devastation out of this entire earthquake. It left 200 people injured and approximately 56 to 60 people who perished in this earthquake, and a total of 3 fatalities in the Olive View Hospital. The earthquake was actually a 6.5 magnitude, and it left everything in shambles around Olive View Hospital, to where the whole entire facility had to be torn down, leaving this pretty much a monument and a reminder of that 1971 earthquake. But yet again, Olive View Medical Center would be rebuilt, but not specifically in the exact same location. However, further away, there were still remnants of the building. Now, this is no longer in existence since the whole entire place has been torn down. This was left, I want to say, in the early 90s was when this picture was taken. But a lot of people who would travel here would claim that they would hear strange noises, see weird anomalies, and oftentimes hear people crying. Let me know in the comments if you remember Olive View Sanitarium, if you remember those disasters, if your parents ever even talked about them in the comments. And always remember to stay haunted and weird. To tell you the truth, this area might be a really interesting location for another open investigation. Let me know in the comments if you're interested.
Let's read some creepy first date stories. One time I went out with someone, and while driving around, he was making comments about how we were dangerously close to running out of gas and couldn't understand why we didn't find a gas station when it felt like we just passed by so many. He made jokes about us having to camp out together, and I didn't like it. It felt weird. Then our GPS couldn't load, and he kept managing to get us lost, thus making more jokes about being stuck together for the night. It wasn't said humorously. When we finally got back to my car, it felt like I was being watched, and I kept seeing something white in the corner of my eye, and then he started wanting to tell ghost stories in his car. I was all sorts of freaked out. It felt like his goal was to keep me in the car, until I kept saying how many people have my location. But it had a touch of paranormal feels throughout the night. Okay, yeah, not only was this man creepy, like getting y'all lost, but also creepy paranormal. Like, was this man a demon? Was he haunted? Hell no. So this happened like a decade ago. I can't remember her name or how we met. My first memory is sitting with her late at night in a noisy pub on a first date. The waitress had just taken our drink order. So we are talking about this and that, and the conversation happens onto funny video clips. So I show her a funny video clip on my phone. She giggles and proceeds to show me one. So I take her phone, and it's a clip of a man getting his head cut off by religious extremists. This feeling of horror, sorrow, and total emptiness comes over me, like a void. Like a vast body of dark waters. There's nothing to say, nothing to do, no witty comeback, nowhere to go from here. Because it's seen, and it can never be unseen, and I wasn't given a choice in the matter. I just stare at her phone until it locks and the light goes off. I look up at her, and she is just sitting there, taking in my reaction, smiling. There was no second date. Okay, listen, I am all into like creepy, scary, horror stuff, but I don't think, if I was on a first date, I don't think I would show them a video like that. At least not without their consent. Friday evening, I agreed to meet someone for a drink that I met on Facebook dating. We had several Facebook friends in common, including my ex-husband's first wife, so I figured giving him my cell number was okay. We met up, and while he was pleasant enough, he started going on and on about his connections to very prominent local people / police, etc., and bragging about all of his real estate. We wound up walking to another place a couple blocks away, and he started putting his hand on my thigh and making me uncomfortable. I texted one of my friends when he was in the bathroom, telling her all of this. I had also sent her his profile. I decided to go home because he continued to make unwanted advances, and my spidey senses were going off. I told him he was weirding me out. When I got home, he texted me repeatedly, begging me to call him. Then he called 3 to 4 times. I didn't respond or answer. Yesterday morning, my friend did a little sleuthing on this dude, and he was arrested in 2017 for child SA. He had also given me a fake last name. Then he texted me like nothing happened. I responded that I didn't want to continue and wished him the best. I was honestly a little scared at that point and didn't want to set him off. Well, apparently, he's a stalker too, because he called me late last night 6 times between 12 a.m. and 12:30 a.m., and twice this morning. I had my ringer off, thankfully. I blocked him immediately, but now I'm concerned. I live alone, and it would be easy to find out my last name via mutual Facebook friends. Maybe I've watched too much Dateline, but I'm very uneasy. I've never had something like this happen before. Anyway, ladies, be safe out there. If you meet someone online or like through someone, always Google them. Do they have any mugshots? And I'm not shaming anybody for going to jail, okay? But what are the charges? You know, because some aren't that bad, whatever. But some are really bad. You need to know who you're going on a date with, so freaking Google them. We've all had bad dates, right? This is the only date I've had to date that rang every alarm bell and waved every red flag. I'll preface this by saying I don't go on many dates, but when I do, I make sure I follow safety protocol by only meeting my date in public places. Let either family or friends know where I'm going and park in a populated place close by to wherever we meet. Anyway, this date initially suggested we meet at his house to watch a movie and have a few drinks. And I said no, I don't feel comfortable with that, and I only want to meet in public. He seemed okay with this, but then brought it up a few more times, and I said if money is an issue, we could meet up another time or forget about it altogether. But my date backtracked and went with my idea of meeting at a cafe I chose. Anyway, he turns up in a 2-door car. This detail is relevant. And goes into the cafe, and I follow behind and introduce myself. After a polite introduction, things begin to get weird. I order a Coke, and he says, "Don't you want a drink?" I was going to pop into bar, which is connected to the cafe, and get one. I say no, I'm not drinking, and he looks at me like, what the fuck, as if I'm being unreasonable. I already explained in messages I don't drink as I'm on medication, so having to re-explain it again pissed me off. He seems disappointed and goes to order a cider from the bar while I get a table. Anyway, we sit down with our drinks, and date immediately goes on about going back to his place again, even though the original plan was to stay here and order food, and I already stated that was not happening. He says something along the lines of having a few drinks and eating at his place, and I said we don't have to eat, we can just have our drinks and leave. He gets defensive and says he has money, but prefers it if we go back to his. I make a joke and say, "You're not a killer, are you?" And instead of laughing it off, he stares at me uncannily and says, "You don't think I would hurt you, do you?" I laugh uncomfortably and say, "Of course not, but really, I'm relieved this date won't be going any further." Date suddenly says, "Are you going to follow me in your car? Because that wouldn't make sense. How about we go in my car? But I've got packages in the front, so you'll have to squeeze in the back, and I'll drop you back off to your car after." In reality, that made less sense than me following him in my own car and then driving home from his house after. The fact it was completely illogical made it even more creepy in my mind. Every alarm bell was going off at this point. I said, "Look, I don't want to go to yours, and your insistence is giving me the creeps." Date looks shocked, mumbles something about needing the toilet, and excuses himself from the table. A few minutes later, I see him through the cafe window getting into his car and driving off. Massive bullet dodged, in my opinion. Also, the fact his car didn't have back doors made it even more sinister, because imagine if something happened in the car and I couldn't escape. Yeah, I was reading some of the comments on this story, and people were saying, this guy did not have good intentions. He was upset that you weren't drinking. Duh, because now you're going to be sober and of sound mind. He can't spike your drink. He can't take advantage of you. And him wanting you to ride in the back seat of his 2-door car? That's creepy. This person is really smart. And yeah, I did it a million times in my younger single days, okay? Going to people's houses that you meet online. No, you should always meet somebody in a well-lit, populated place. And don't let any motherfucker try to convince you into drinking.
Let's read a true and scary story from Reddit. This one's called A Visitor Who Never Left. I was 18 years old when this happened. At the time, I was living at home with my parents, who had recently moved far out into the countryside. Their farm was part of a tiny rural cluster, about 7 farms on one road. That night, I was home alone with our dog, a large Labrador I was looking after, until my parents came back the next day. It was around 11 p.m. I was lying on the upstairs couch with a movie playing quietly on the TV, half asleep and relaxed in the stillness of the house. Then 3 loud knocks shattered the silence. They came from the front door downstairs, the door directly at the bottom of the staircase leading up to where I was. The sound was sharp and deliberate, not hesitant, not accidental. My dog sprang out of his bed beside me and started barking immediately. I tried to calm him, but he was beyond listening. He bolted down the stairs and positioned himself in front of the door, barking and growling into the darkness. Outside, the courtyard was completely black. I stood halfway down the staircase, my pulse hammering in my ears, and called out, "Hello?" No reply. Just silence. I called again, louder this time. Still nothing. The quiet that followed felt wrong, thick and watchful. After a moment that felt much longer than it was, I forced myself to move. I stepped down the rest of the stairs, my dog still tense at the door. Carefully, I opened it just enough to lean my head outside. There was nothing there. No lights, no movement, no footsteps fading away, only the dark courtyard and the cold night air. It felt like whoever or whatever had knocked had simply vanished. I shut the door quickly and locked every entrance in the house. My hands were shaking as I called my parents. They immediately contacted our neighbors, a couple who lived nearby. Within minutes, they arrived. I explained what had happened, still trying to steady my voice. They decided to walk around the barns and check the property. Those 10 minutes felt endless. When they returned, they said they hadn't found anything. Still, they strongly suggested I come sleep in their guest room for the night. I told them it was probably just me overreacting if nothing had been found, but they kept insisting, more seriously than I expected, that it would be safer to come with them. I refused. I couldn't leave my dog alone. Before leaving, they told me to call immediately if anything else happened, no matter how small. When my parents returned the next day, they installed surveillance cameras outside the front door. They said it was to make me feel safer, especially since I was often home alone with the dog. A few months later, my parents were celebrating their 25th wedding anniversary. During the evening, I found myself talking with my female neighbor and thanked her again for coming over that night. Her expression shifted. She went quiet for a moment, like she was weighing whether to say what was on her mind. Then she told me she had to be honest with me. That night, shortly before my parents called her, she had been outside saying goodnight to her horses. The yard was completely still. No wind, no distant cars, nothing. That's when she heard it. Footsteps. Clear, deliberate footsteps crunching through the gravel in our courtyard. Not random, not hurried. Slow, controlled, like someone walking with purpose in the dark. She said the sound carried unnaturally well in the silence. Then the footsteps stopped, right there in the yard. She waited to hear them continue, to hear someone speak, a door, or anything, but there was only a heavy, suffocating silence. And just moments later, my parents called her about the knocking. She told me she never heard those footsteps leave. I feel like for me, these are always the most scary stories because in this case, there was no closure. Somebody even said there was no closure of finding out what this even was in their courtyard. And how do you continue to live in a house where you heard footsteps that never left? Like, what if something is still on your property? Like, absolutely not. And then for added context, the original poster did say that their house dates back to 1865, but other records show that another farm stood on that exact ground as far back as the 1600s, so it has been around for a very long time. And I'm sure there have been many spirits that have lived and died on that land, in that house, whatever, which makes it all the more interesting because it makes me wonder whether or not this was a previous owner that's coming and visiting the original poster. If you guys have any stories you'd like me to read, please email them to me and I will get to them if I can, and I will see you in the next one.
This story today comes from my mum and dad. When my mum and dad first met, a few years before my sister and I were born, they went on a little road trip to Calgary, Alberta, to Bridgewater, Nova Scotia, to see my grandparents, my mum's parents. I believe it was for Christmas. Now, depending on how fast you want to be, it takes just over 2 days. So, of course, they stopped for the night. This was in the early 2000s, so maybe 2003. My mum and dad are both very sensitive to energies. My mum was born naturally with it, you could say, which seems par for the course when growing up in the East, in a small town in the Appalachian Mountains. Wow. They stopped for the night at a rundown motel on the side of the highway. Immediately upon arriving, they both felt very uneasy. My mum refused to go inside to speak with the man at the front counter, so my dad went in. He requested a single room, trying his best to make polite conversation. It was late at night and my dad had been driving for a full day at this point and just really wanted to sleep. He didn't care where. But the man at the front counter would not take his eyes off my mum in the car. He, rather intentionally, seemed to take his time on getting my dad's key ready and taking payment. After a while, my dad, already uneasy and tired at this point, was getting ready to leave when the man at the front said, "Is that your girl?" My dad asked what it was to the man, and I believe my dad said the look in his eyes was so unnerving, he practically ran out of the lobby. Anyway, a gross, creepy start to the night. When my parents got to their room, imagine late 80s, early 90s tan and yellow basic motel, burgundy sheets, gross carpeted floors, the whole 9 yards. My mom was not comfortable whatsoever. She couldn't explain why, and she refused to do so. The air just felt thick, and they were not wanted there. My parents have this unspoken rule, even after being divorced for nearly 20 years, they both have instilled it in us, that we should never speak of supernatural experiences in the place you see it. Wait till you're outside.
Right.
At this point in the story, they experienced two completely different things, but I believe both of them. In the middle of the night, they were sleeping and in the spooning position. My mum was the little spoon. What they could both see was the front door slightly to their right and the door to the bathroom on the very left side of the room, on the wall beside them. A mirror was hanging on the wall in front of them beside the door, far enough that in the reflection you could only see the foot of the bed. Basically, the bed was parallel to the wall where the main door is when you entered the room. My mum woke up in the middle of the night, and immediately her eyes were on the door to the bathroom. The bathroom door was open, all the lights were off, but the light of the moon was bright enough to illuminate some of the inside, and she swears she saw a little boy peeking his head round the door. She could only see his hair and his eyes, and a little hand grabbing the door frame. She didn't move, she just held her breath and watched. After a good while of staring at each other, he ran across the room, leaving wet footprints across the carpet. My dad woke up just moments later and told her they needed to leave. They packed up their things and they made their way out in the motel. They left the key and ran to their car. When they got in the car, they just looked at each other, terrified, and drove off without another word. My mum doesn't know what my dad saw, since he never talked about it, but my dad told me. What he saw was an old, what he believed to be, Native American chief. My dad was in awe, but also filled with an intense feeling of dread. He saw the man stalk out of the bathroom and stand in front of them. He just stared for what felt like hours, and my dad never took his eyes off him. The chief would phase in and out of view, sometimes ending up on the other side of the room, pacing, or in the opposite corner, just staring. I believe he said the chief leant over the bed and stared at my dad for a while at one point, crying. Then they got to Bridgewater a day later and pretty much forgot about the whole thing. Until they're on their way back home. They exchanged a look and both agreed to not stay at that motel again. As they were coming up to the same area as the motel, my dad audibly gasped and pulled over. My mum and dad had chills sent down their spines. They were utterly speechless as they got out of the car. The motel they stayed in, less than a week ago, was now boarded up. Vines growing wild and the visible wear and tear of time had eaten away at the exterior of the building. It looked like it had been abandoned for at least 20 years.
What the?
They got in their little Volkswagen Golf and peeled out of there, never speaking of it again. That's all I have for today, and I'll definitely be submitting more, some of them my personal stories and more from when my parents were younger if you'd like. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope it wasn't too long.
Star in the sky. On the morning of Monday, January 7th, 1985, a 31-year-old man arrived at an international airport in order to board his flight to the United States. The man was very nervous. His heart was beating fast and his palms were sweating so much that he could barely hold the handles of his very heavy tan-colored suitcase. And the reason he was so nervous is because he was feeling very conflicted about what he was about to do. On the one hand, this trip was something he'd been dreaming of for months, and it was supposed to represent the start of a great brand new life. Now, this man hadn't actually packed very many personal items to take with him. But one thing he had brought was a little bound book full of photographs, which showed what mattered the most to him. And what mattered the most was waiting for him in America. But on the other hand, the man was terrified, because before he could begin this brand new life, he had a huge problem he needed to take care of. And that problem was why he needed to drop off his very heavy suitcase without anybody looking inside of it. And so now, inside the airport, the very nervous man stopped and readjusted his grip on the suitcase handles, and then made his way over to the ticketing area, where he would check his bag for his almost 11-hour flight to California. And then, once he touched down and they landed in California, he could get off the plane, go to the baggage carousel, and get his luggage, and then everything would be fine. Now, of course, he knew this was a big gamble. If it had been possible, he would have just brought this bag with him on the plane to stow it in the overhead bin, but he just couldn't do it because the bag was too big, too heavy. And so really his only other choice, if he wanted the suitcase to make it to California, was to check it like he was doing, because the alternative was leaving it behind, and there was no way he was going to do that. He cared far too much about what was inside of this luggage. And so by the time the man actually got in line in the ticketing and baggage check area, he was so stressed out that he was beginning to feel physically ill. By the time he got to the front of the line, he still felt very sick, but he composed himself enough that he walked up to the counter of the airline he was traveling with, which was Lufthansa Airline, and the employee who was working behind the counter was very cheerful, and they greeted the man and took his passport to verify his information. Then the employee put down the passport and then reached out his hand and gestured for the nervous man to give him his very important suitcase. This was, of course, the moment the man had feared the most, when everything could really go astray. But as calm as he could, he lifted up the suitcase, and for a second he almost panicked because it was just so obviously heavy. He realized the employee might make him open it right there because it just seemed wrong that this suitcase was that heavy. And he knew if that happened, he was done for. He'd be arrested immediately. But instead, the employee just dragged the heavy suitcase over to a conveyor belt behind the counter, and the nervous man watched as the employee heaved the suitcase onto the belt, and the man kept his eyes locked on the suitcase as it rolled down the belt and then disappeared through a pair of rubber flaps at the very end. He was so focused on the bag, he almost didn't notice the airline employee returning to try to hand him his boarding pass for the plane. Finally, the employee literally just waved the ticket in the man's face to get his attention, and it kind of snapped him out of it, and he took the boarding pass, and as calmly as he could, he thanked the employee, and then he turned and hurried off to catch his flight. About 12 hours later, on the other side of the world, another employee of Lufthansa Airlines walked around the baggage claim area at Los Angeles International Airport, which is typically just called LAX. It was about 2 p.m. Los Angeles time, and the employee was working in the international terminal. It was his job to monitor the circular carousels where passengers picked up their luggage after their flights, and his job was to make sure no bags were left behind. And as he was making one of these loops, he noticed there was a tan-colored suitcase with soft sides sitting all alone on one of the carousels. The employee stopped and checked the monitor above the carousel to see the last time this carousel had been used by an incoming plane, and it was quite a while ago, and all the passengers clearly had come through and picked up their luggage, except for this one lone bag. So, based on the timing, the employee figured that, well, this bag must be unclaimed. But this was not remotely concerning to him. I mean, luggage went unclaimed all the time. Sometimes because bags were sent to the wrong airport, or because the suitcase's owner missed their flight, or even just forgot to get it. But whatever the reason was, it was this employee's job to simply start the process of identifying the owner of the suitcase. So, like he always did, he walked over to the carousel and grabbed the suitcase handle and went to pick it up. But when he did, he let out a sort of surprised grunt and stumbled because the suitcase was so much heavier than he had expected. So he went back and he grabbed the handle with a better grip this time with two hands and braced himself and yanked, and the suitcase kind of toppled over and fell off the carousel onto the floor. And this was also around the time that the employee noticed that this really heavy suitcase had no tags on it. And so now this bag did seem very unusual. The extreme weight and no tags, that's not normal. So he knelt down and he began to unzip the suitcase to see what was inside. He was legally allowed to do this because unclaimed bags at airports are subject to search. But he had only unzipped it a little bit before he froze, and for a second he just stared in shock at what was inside of the suitcase. But then he immediately got to his feet, just left the bag there, and ran to go find a phone to call the police. A little less than 2 hours later, around 3:45 p.m., Detective Don Ravens of the Los Angeles Police Department's Pacific Division stood in the baggage area of LAX's International Terminal, looking down grimly into the tan suitcase that was lying open on the floor. He was surrounded by officials from the LAPD, as well as the FBI, who had all been called to the airport because of what was found inside of the suitcase: the dead body of a young woman. Detective Ravens was shocked. He guessed this woman was maybe less than 30 years old, and judging by her features and dark hair, He thought she could be from an Asian or Latin American country, but that was about as far as he could get since she didn't have any identification with her, and there were no tags on the bag. There were also no obvious wounds on her body, so he couldn't immediately tell how she died. Ravens spent some time speaking to airline and airport employees, including Customs, which is the government agency that's in charge of inspecting bags that are coming in and out of the country, and he was puzzled as to how a suitcase with a body inside of it had somehow cleared customs, but an agent explained that they didn't actually open up all the suitcases, which meant whoever checked this bag through customs had taken a huge risk, because realistically, they could have been searched and then the body would have been found. So this suggested a certain level of desperation, but apparently this risk this person took to check the bag had paid off because the bag had gone all the way to California. But despite that, Ravens didn't find much to go on here. At this moment, the victim was a Jane Doe, which meant there was no identification for her. And Ravens knew she could really be from anywhere in the world, despite, his snap judgment that perhaps she was from an Asian or Latin American country. And because LAX was an international airport, whoever checked this bag and potentially even put her into the suitcase could now be anywhere in the world too. Once Detective Ravens and the other investigators had finished examining the body as it was found inside of the suitcase, they didn't actually pull her body out. They sent the suitcase and her body to the coroner. Hopefully, an autopsy would turn up evidence that could tell Ravens and the other investigators who this Jane Doe was and what happened to her. The following day, on Tuesday, Ravens sat down at his desk and he opened up a manila folder he had been given. Inside of it was his Jane Doe's autopsy report. And when the detective began reading it, he couldn't help but feel sick, because what he was reading told him that this poor woman had died a horrible, torturous death. The report said the woman had bruises all over her body, like the kind you would get from repeated heavy blows delivered over a period of at least several hours while she was still alive, and her actual eventual cause of death was ultimately suffocation, which meant she either was suffocated and then put into the suitcase, or was in the suitcase, trapped inside of there, and suffocated. Ravens put down the report and leaned back in his chair and just sort of thought through what he had just learned. Based on the autopsy, he now knew this poor woman had died a brutal, awful death, but the coroner had not found any identifying information or anything on her that would give away or help to give away who she actually was or who did this to her. So really he had very little here other than knowing this lady suffered. Ravens had spent the last 24 hours poring over all the surveillance footage from the airport security cameras, looking for any suspicious passengers leaving without any luggage. But nothing had jumped out at him. He'd also interviewed a bunch of airport employees who would have been in the baggage claim area on the day the body was found, but none of them had noticed anything strange either. And so, despite it only having been one day since this woman was found, Ravens was already worried that this case was going to go cold. But what Ravens had not counted on was the huge amount of publicity his Jane Doe would generate. The TV news, as well as the newspapers, were reporting feverishly on the body that was found in the LAX suitcase. And by Wednesday, so 48 hours after the body was found, the reporting had made it all the way to Peru, where a man named Juan Espinoza contacted authorities to report that the body might actually belong to his wife. Officials in Peru called the LAPD, and Juan's report ended up on Ravens' desk. Ravens opened up that report and began reading. Juan and his wife lived in Peru's capital city of Lima, but his wife had been trying to leave Peru to escape poverty. She had left their home hoping to basically sneak into the United States so she could get a job there and then send money back to her family in Peru. She had promised Juan that she would contact him when she arrived in America, but after she left, Juan said he never heard from her. This report felt like a promising lead to Ravens. Juan and his wife checked a lot of boxes, especially because, Ravens' Jane Doe had features that indicated she could be from a South American country like Peru. And so Ravens wondered if Juan's wife had tried to get into America by using a human smuggler, which is someone who transports immigrants across borders illegally. Human smuggling was obviously an unregulated industry, and Ravens knew smugglers could be very violent or reckless, and the people they were transporting often had no protection. Meaning, sometimes when people would go to these smugglers to try to get help to go to these other countries, sometimes the smuggler wouldn't help them, they would just rob them, or in some cases, rob them and then kill them and dispose of their body. And unfortunately, again, because there's no regulation or oversight, a lot of times these horrible crimes would just go unnoticed. And so maybe if that's what had happened to Raven's Jane Doe, it would explain why the tags were ripped off the suitcase. The smuggler who, committed this crime would not have wanted to leave any ID on or around the body that could be traced back to them. And so Ravens picked up his phone to call the LAX airport operations manager to see if he could get the logs for any flights coming from Peru to LAX on the day the body was found. And that was when he discovered there was a big problem with this theory, because there were no flights from Peru. The only flights that day that used the luggage carousel where the body was found were from Korea, Japan, and Germany. And there weren't any flights that originated in Peru that had layovers in those countries either, which meant it just wasn't possible that his Jane Doe was Juan's wife. And so now Ravens was stumped all over again. He had almost no evidence to go on. All he really had was the suitcase and the body. And the actual crime scene itself was maybe somewhere in Korea or Japan or Germany. And so Ravens really didn't have a good idea of where he should begin looking for more evidence. But then he got an idea. Detective Ravens got up from his desk and headed straight to the evidence room. He put on a pair of disposable gloves, and he found the box that contained evidence from Jane Doe's case, and he opened it up. And there really wasn't much. All that was in there were, pieces of jewelry and some clothing that were found on the woman's body. And all of it had already been examined for trace evidence like blood or hair. However, blood and hair were not what Ravens was looking for. One at a time, he lifted out each of the sealed plastic bags that contained Jane Doe's belongings until he got to her blue sweater. He took the sweater out of the plastic and he turned it over in his hands and then checked inside the neckband. And there he found exactly what he was looking for. Immediately, he felt a rush of adrenaline. He was onto something here. And so he reached back into the box and he grabbed another plastic bag with a pair of gray pants in it. And he did the same thing. He looked at the waistband. Then he opened a third bag and he checked inside of her blouse. And each time, his hunch had been right. Jane Doe's clothing had labels sewn into them. And the labels were clearly written in some language that was not English. Ravens wasn't sure, but to him, he thought maybe the letters looked Middle Eastern. It didn't take long for the FBI to help Ravens and the LAPD identify the origin of Jane Doe's clothing. All of it had been made in the Middle East, in Iran. This meant that finally, Detective Ravens had a likely country of origin for his Jane Doe. But he also had another problem now. Really, he had the same problem he'd had when he thought his victim was from Peru. And that was that there were only 3 international flights that his Jane Doe could have been on. And none of them originated in Iran. And there were no connecting flights from Iran that day either. And so Ravens needed the public's help. On Thursday, so 3 days after the body was found, he and another detective sat down with a reporter from the city's newspaper, the Los Angeles Times, a publication that's read all over the world. And Raven and this other detective's goal was, to give as many updates as they could about the case, hoping that somebody somewhere would read the story, recognize a detail, and come forward. However, that's not really how the interview played out. By the end of it, Ravens was feeling pretty discouraged by all the questions he and his partner just couldn't answer. In fact, the last thing he said to the reporter, which ended up getting printed as the sort of last line of the story, the lasting impression, if you will, was, "Don't be too surprised if you never find out where she came from or who she is." The next morning, Detective Ravens got to his office and had barely taken off his coat when his phone rang. A police officer from Sacramento, California was on the other line, and he sounded all worked up. He told Ravens that he knew that, the LA investigators had been working on the airport Jane Doe case, and even though it wasn't going anywhere, he knew it was a big deal for them. But he told Ravens that he actually had this unbelievable development in Northern California that was connected to the airport Jane Doe case. He said authorities in Northern California had just found another body. But when Ravens heard this, his first reaction was not excitement that there was new evidence or something. It was confusion. He didn't need another body. He needed to find his Jane Doe's name. And so he asked the Sacramento officer, what he meant. Had they found another woman in another suitcase or something? But the Sacramento officer said no. The body belonged to a man. And this guy's name had never even been on police radar. He had died from a gunshot wound, 400 miles away from Raven's Jane Doe. But the officer said that the story they had uncovered behind this new body would likely solve Raven's Jane Doe case. This is the story that the Sacramento officer told Ravens. On the evening of Monday, January 7th, Just a few hours after Jane Doe's body had been found at LAX, a man named Hadi had picked up his friend and roommate, a 31-year-old man named Mahmoud Ayazi, at the Sacramento airport, which is about 400 miles north of LAX. Hadi was excited to see Mahmoud, who'd been away for a few weeks. They were good friends, and Mahmoud was always very optimistic and fun to be around. But on this day, when Mahmoud got in his car, Hadi immediately noticed that his friend seemed sullen and quiet and just very clearly upset about something. And so Hadi asked him what was wrong. And Mahmoud just said, "Oh, I'm sick with the flu." But to Hadi, Mahmoud did not look very sick. He looked worried and kind of jittery and nervous. And as they started to drive, he kept looking out the windows and out the back of the car, like he was nervous about somebody following them or something. And when they got back to their apartment, Mahmoud went straight to bed. And for the next 2 days, Mahmoud continued acting increasingly weird and paranoid. He asked Hadi to disconnect the phone in their apartment and said he didn't want to see any of their mutual friends. He also kept looking out the windows of their apartment, but whenever Hadi asked what was wrong, Mahmoud refused to explain. Then, sometime before 6 a.m. on Thursday morning, so now 3 days after Hadi picked Mahmoud up from the airport, Hadi woke up to the sound of the front door of his apartment opening and then shutting. So it felt way too early for Hadi or Mahmoud to be up, and they also lived in a city where break-ins were unfortunately not uncommon. So the sound of the door opening was enough for Hadi to get out of bed and go make sure everything was okay. But when he got to the door, he did not find an intruder or something. He found Mahmoud in the process of leaving the apartment. Hadi asked his friend, where are you going? But Mahmoud just shook his head and said he was simply going out. And so there was really nothing Hadi could do. I mean, he couldn't stop Mahmoud from going out, so he watched his friend leave, and then Hadi went back to bed. But as he was in bed, he had this sick feeling in his stomach that something bad was about to happen. About 2 hours later, somebody called the Sacramento Police Department to report finding a dead body in the driver's seat of a car in a parking lot. The dead man had clearly died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound, and on the passenger seat next to the body were 2 Iranian passports and 1 Lufthansa Airlines plane ticket. When the Sacramento police officer finished telling Detective Ravens the story, he said he believed that one of the passports that were found in the car with the body belonged to Ravens' Jane Doe. He said he would send it over that afternoon by courier so Ravens could make a positive ID. And when the passport did arrive, Ravens was able to finally give his Jane Doe her name back. She was a 20-year-old Iranian woman named Katan Safawi. And after investigators searched Mahmoud's apartment, they would find another piece of evidence that would actually explain why Katan Safawi had ended up beaten and pummeled and asphyxiated to death in an abandoned tan suitcase in LAX. The evidence was a little bound book, and it was full of photographs. Back on January 7th, 1985, Mahmoud very nervously dropped off the tan suitcase that contained Katan at the international airport and then boarded a Lufthansa flight to LAX. He was traveling from Frankfurt, Germany, one of the 3 cities that had flights into LAX that day that specifically used the carousel where the body was found. But Mahmoud's trip had not started in Frankfurt. It had started in Iran. But his travel plans had gotten all messed up, and he'd gotten stuck in Germany for several days. And so this was him finally getting out. But he was insanely nervous about this leg of the trip because of what was in his suitcase. He had expected to feel much less worried once he had successfully checked the suitcase and got his ticket and boarded his flight. But when he did all that, and when his plane took off, Mahmoud only got more and more anxious. Every time the plane hit even the tiniest amount of turbulence, he wanted to scream from the anxiety. But finally, the flight landed at LAX, and as soon as it touched down, Mahmoud got off as fast as he could and practically sprinted to the baggage carousel where he would pick up his suitcase and then board another flight to Sacramento. But when he got to baggage claim and he picked up his suitcase, he knew immediately something was wrong. With a shaking hand, he unzipped the suitcase. And when he looked inside, he felt a wave of grief and horror that was so powerful he almost fainted right there. Because the trip that Mahmoud had been dreaming of for months, that he was returning home from now, was a journey to his home country of Iran to get married to the woman he loved, Katan. And now, inside the suitcase, was the dead body of his new wife, Katan. who Mahmoud had been trying to smuggle into America to start their new life together. Katan had run into issues with her visa in Frankfurt, and officials wouldn't let her board the plane to America. And so Katan and Mahmoud tried for days to fix this problem, but it became clear that only Mahmoud would be able to actually enter the United States, not Katan. And so ultimately, Katan willingly got into that suitcase. Mahmoud had not murdered her, or at least not intentionally so. She hadn't been trafficked or anything. She chose to get in that suitcase. Together, they decided that they would smuggle her in the cargo hold of the plane, and that's how they would get her to the United States. But during the flight, when she had boarded, she had been totally alive. But when she was in the cargo hold, other luggage had fallen and piled on top of her and slowly crushed her to death. And so when Mahmoud got to LAX and opened up the suitcase and saw what had happened, he panicked. He pulled the tags off the suitcase and left the suitcase and just got on his flight to Sacramento. And then once he landed there, he was so overcome with guilt and grief that 3 days later, he took his own life. When police searched Mahmoud's room, they found the little bound book full of photographs that he had so carefully packed for his trip to America. And those photos were of his and Katan's wedding. The following week, Mahmoud and Katan's bodies were sent back to Iran via the same route they had taken to get to Los Angeles. But this time, they traveled together.
Hello and welcome back to a series of spooky stories, The Haunted Tea Spill. This series is brought to you by all things spooky and ungodly amounts of paranormal activity. As always, the necklaces. You can't tell me that these don't actually stack really. Anyway, you know where to find them. Now onto the story. This one really scared me at the time, but it's not so scary for me anymore. Let me explain. I was in my 20s when this happened. One night after working my closing shift at Domino's, I was a manager at the time. I was driving home to my husband and young daughter. It was about 1:30 a.m. About halfway there, I started dozing off. I woke up right before veering off the road. I corrected myself and kept going. I would have had to have pulled over to the side of the road to collect myself because my spirit would have left my fucking body. After stopping to cross the road to go to my neighborhood, I saw a light from the corner of my eye on the passenger side. I turned to look at it and all of a sudden it dove towards me. Dove? Did you dodge? I jumped and felt its presence go into me as if entering my body where I sat. Hell no. I froze and felt hands go over the top of my hands as if they were holding them in place on the steering wheel. Although I felt frozen, I continued to drive home. It was as if this presence was the one driving and not me. That's crazy. My eyes were so wide with fear that I couldn't close them. I pulled into my driveway by the house. Once I was there, the hands came off of mine and the presence left me, through my left side as if getting out of the car. I put the car in park, ran inside to my sleeping husband, shook him awake, and told him to hold me. Very valid. Very, very valid response. I couldn't tell him right away what happened. It took a good 5 minutes for me to calm down. Once I calmed down, I told him. Now here's why I'm not scared anymore. My dad died in a single car crash when I was 19 and pregnant with my daughter. Stop! Ah! God, y'all get me with these ones. He died the Monday before Thanksgiving in 2005. He rolled his truck and was ejected from it and died instantly. They believe he fell asleep at the wheel, and when he felt it drift, he woke up, overcorrected the truck, causing his accident. I now believe that it was my dad that saved me that night from making the same mistake that he did. I can guarantee you that was him, and that makes me so sad. I love that he was your guardian angel, but fuck, man, that's sad as fuck. I truly believe that he was my guardian angel that night, and that's the only way that I can explain what happened. This year will be 20 years since he passed, and I miss him so much. The sad stories are really getting me, okay? No scary, creepy, spooky, just sad. Freaky. That definitely would be freaky. That would be a very, very interesting experience. But not creepy, spooky, just sad. If you have a story of your own that you want to submit, you can do so on the link tree in my profile. I will see you all at the next episode. Stay spooky, friends.
There are these desert highways that go 60, 70 miles without you ever seeing a single person, house, a gas station. They are so remote and isolated that they are terrifying to drive. And there are people who claim to see these entities on the side of the road. They call them the Watchers, the Night Stalkers. Some people call them stickmen. The Native Americans call them stick Indians. Now, there was this trucker named Lamont. Lamont was driving from California to Oklahoma. And he did not like truck stops. He didn't like to stay at truck stops. And so he would always take these back roads, these scenic routes, so that he could pull off onto like a dirt road and sleep in the back of his camper at night. Well, he found himself on this one particular stretch of highway in Arizona where it was just completely open desert. And there was nothing around except cactuses and small bushes. As he's driving down this road, it is approaching twilight. The sun is starting to go down, the sky is red, and he had maybe about 40 to 50 miles to the nearest town. Well, he started to notice something off in the distance up on the highway. And he said it was over to the right, just standing there, and it looked like some kind of large cactus. As the truck got a little closer, he started to realize it had the shape of a very skinny, tall person. And it looked like a stick figure, is how he described it. He gets within about 20 to 30 feet of this thing. And he could see that this thing is like 9 feet, 10 feet tall. It is huge, but it doesn't have any shape or form, really. It is just like a giant stick person. And he's so distracted and focused on this that he accidentally crashes his truck. And the back of the truck fishtails off the road, and he finds himself turned around in the middle of this desert road. So he manages to back the truck and get it straightened out, and he pulls off to the side of the road. At this point in time, he notices whatever this figure or thing was, it was gone. He figures, I better inspect the truck and make sure that I didn't do any damage. So he gets out of the truck, and he goes around to the trailer. And as he's looking on the passenger side wheels, he hears the rattle of wind hitting these like shrubs. So he turns around, and off in the distance, there is the stick figure thing again. It is just standing there. It isn't moving, and it looked like a giant stick person. So he's like, I need to get this done and get back in my truck. So he starts inspecting the wheels again. This time when he turns around, it is now closer to him. And as he moves a little further and he turns around again, it is now even closer. And by the time he gets to the passenger side door, this thing is right up on him. And he can see this thing is 9 foot tall. So he jumps in the truck, he starts it up, and he starts driving off. As he's driving down the highway, he gets maybe a mile away from where he sees this thing. And he sees it again on the side of the road. And then a couple miles later, he sees it again. And this thing just kept disappearing and reappearing on the same spot on the right side of the highway. And all the way until he reached this town, which was 40 miles away, this thing continued to follow him. Finally, he gets into this small little town, which is on a reservation, and he pulls into the small gas station. He gets out of his truck and he goes in and he grabs a coffee. And the Native American man who is behind the counter says, you look stressed, like, is everything okay? He goes, you're not going to believe me, but, I just had this experience with something that looked like a stick figure. And the Native American man said, oh, yeah, I know. He said, my people, we talk about this all the time, but it's called, a stick Indian. And, we believed that in older times, our ancestors, they would ride horses and they would see these things out in the desert. And sometimes they would chase them. Sometimes they were just protectors or watching over the land. And so he said after that, even though he did not like rest stops or truck stops, he chose to only stay at truck stops and stay on the interstate. At night when you're turning off the lights in the house and you get to that last light, and as soon as the light turns off, you start seeing things, you start hearing stuff. So you take off running as fast as you can and you lock yourself in your bedroom. That's probably happened to you thousands of times. It's happened to me. But what is it about turning off the lights at night that makes it so creepy and terrifying? Now, there was this man named Christopher. Christopher was from Columbus, Ohio. And he said this one summer, him and his family moved into this very old home. And he said one of the things about this home was he didn't like it at night, especially when it was dark. But his father was very particular about turning off the lights at night. And so because he was the last person to go to bed, he always had to go downstairs and shut off all the lights throughout the house. So he said one night he had left several lights on downstairs. So he goes down there and he starts turning off lights. He said he got to the last light, which was the living room, dining room area. And as soon as the light turned off, he began to hear some noises. He said it sounded like footsteps running around in the living room. And out of the corner of his eye, he could see the shadow of something moving. So he ran as fast as he could to his bedroom, and he slammed the door shut. And he hears these footsteps coming down the hallway, all the way up to his bedroom. And he thought for sure whatever this was going to come in his room. But it was quiet. There was nothing. And this happened every single night, where he would have these weird experiences after he would turn off the lights. He told his parents about it. They didn't believe him. They thought he had an active imagination, but he knew that there was something going on in this home. Said another night he went downstairs and he shut off the lights. And he said as he was making his way through the dark, he ran into something. And he physically felt whatever it was that was moving around in the living room bump into his side and knock him over. And so he started to scream. His parents come downstairs. They turn the lights on. And they're like, what's going on? And he's like, something ran into me, like something is down here. Once again, they yelled at him, told him to go to bed and stop making noises. And he just really didn't know what to do except run to his bedroom every night. So he said finally he got fed up. And he's like, you know what? Tonight, when I go and turn the lights off, after I turn the last light completely off, I'm going to flip it back on and see what this thing is. So he went downstairs and he went to the living room, dining room, and he turned the light off. And as soon as the light went off, he could hear the footsteps and he could see this thing moving. And as soon as he hits the light switch up, back on, he looks and sees a pair of legs running around without an upper body. And he screams and runs to his room as fast as possible. And he said eventually they moved out of that home, but he definitely thought that it might have been haunted.
My name is Angie. About a year ago, I went to live with my older brother and his wife. They have 2 kids, a boy and a girl. And while I was there, I helped out by watching them. Since there were only 3 bedrooms in the house, my other brother had the 3rd room, which meant my nephew and I ended up sharing. He was only 1 year old at the time. Because of that, I was often waking up in the middle of the night to make him a bottle. Sometimes he'd cry out for me, and other times I'd already be awake. I've always been into scary movies and spooky things, but nothing like this had ever happened to me before. My older brother Jose is in the army, so we were living on a military base at the time. The place we lived in was kind of like a house, but also like an apartment. It was 2 stories. One night, I was on my phone watching a movie when my nephew woke up. I heard him groaning, so I got up, went to his crib, grabbed his bottle, and headed downstairs to the kitchen to prepare it. To get there, I had to pass through the laundry room on the ground floor. My brother always left the laundry room light on, but that night, it was off. As I was making the bottle, I got this strange feeling like someone was watching me. It felt like it was coming from the laundry room behind me. I had my back turned to it, and I hurried up because I was scared. I should have known then that this was only the beginning. A couple of days later, around 8 p.m., my brother Jose and his wife were watching the kids, and I decided to go to the park across the street. The park only had a basketball court and some swings, with houses around it and trees that led into a forest. It was dark, but I just wanted to sit on the swings and listen to some music. After a few minutes of swinging, I got that same strange feeling again, like someone was watching me. There was nobody else there. I kept telling myself I was imagining it, but out of the corner of my eye, I saw something running from one tree to another. I got really scared, but again, I tried to brush it off. Then the air around me suddenly got cold. I was wearing a hoodie, but my entire body felt freezing. A few minutes later, my brother called and told me to come home. When I got there, he was outside waiting for me, wearing a tank top and shorts. I asked him if he wasn't cold. He looked at me strangely and said, "No, it's actually pretty hot." Well, a few days later, I was home alone with my nephew and niece. I had just put my nephew to bed upstairs in his crib and went back downstairs to watch a movie. My niece, who was only about 4 or 5 months old, was with me. While I was watching the movie, I suddenly heard footsteps running across the 2nd floor. That immediately scared me because I was alone.
Weird spooky story time, and this happened in Albuquerque, New Mexico. It was early spring in 2013, and at the time, I was just getting into the paranormal. Less than 5 years investigating, and only spirits, nothing more. I didn't know what black-eyed kids were. I ended up getting a phone call from a friend asking me to help him with his race truck for 2 weekend races, one in Farmington, New Mexico, and the next weekend in Amarillo, Texas. We were in between races at a truck stop, and I was randomly working on the truck during the day. It was Thursday night, and we were leaving the next morning. The truck stop got eerie, calm, still, really quiet, really dark, but with an almost anxious energy. My friend went into the truck stop to shower, and I was sitting in the front seat watching the world around me because I felt hunted. It was about 11:30 p.m. and nothing was moving. I kept checking the mirrors, feeling like I was being watched, but I couldn't spot anyone. Clear up front, clear in all the mirrors, we were out at a distance and surrounded by nothing, so no one was going to sneak up. Then someone knocked on my door. I was honestly surprised and jumped. Looking out of the window, it was two teenagers, a girl and a boy. The girl was probably 11 to 13 and the boy 15 to 17. They were looking down and I couldn't see their faces. Both were in jeans. The girl was wearing a white top and the boy was wearing a black hoodie. I said, "Wrong truck." And the male replied, "Can you help me?" So I asked, "What can I do you for?" He said, "Can we come in?" I told him we were an active race team and if he wanted autographs or pictures to come back during daylight and I would introduce them to the driver. At this point, I don't know why, but every hair on my body rose and I felt like I was in a ton of danger. The boy just said again, "Can we come in?" That's when I noticed his voice was monotone and all the lights at the truck stop seemed to dim. Everyone froze. This interaction was the only thing happening. I reached down to my right where I had a pistol. He couldn't see me reaching because of the angles, but he said, "You don't have to be scared of us." I asked him, "What do you want?" And he told me, "I just want to come in." Then he looked at me. This is when I first saw his face. He was an African American kid, but washed out, pale, sick looking, jet black eyes. Nothing striking, extremely ordinary, almost fake, but his eyes. And the world froze. It felt like he was reading my thoughts. I could hear his voice say, "You don't have to be afraid. You need to let us in." Inside my head, it felt like we were locked in a staring match for an eternity. When I finally was able to break out of it, I turned and grabbed my pistol, only to turn to where the kids were, and they were gone. There was no way they could have run without me seeing them. It was a split second. In a panic, I started looking around thinking I was under some sort of attack. But I didn't unlock the truck. I didn't leave the truck, just looking. Slowly, I noticed the lights of the truck stop brightening. The anxiety lowered. Chaos turned to the truck stop. Soon after, my friend came back from his shower and I asked him why he took so long. He'd been gone for hours. He looked at me confused and said, "I took a 15-minute shower. I've been gone for 20 minutes." I asked him if he noticed the lights dimming at the truck stop, and he said no. It was super busy, with a lot of people coming in and out, but I looked like I had seen God himself. For weeks after, I dreamt of those kids. They were everywhere. They were trying to get into my house, my car. If I had a dream about camping, they would show up in my dream asking to come into my tent. After this experience, I noticed the hauntings I started dealing with were darker, angrier, even demonic. And somehow they all knew who I was. Like I had a beacon placed on me to attract weird shit. Ghost hunting went from a hobby to a crash course in darkness. That's when I realized that if it was happening to me, it was happening to others. And I wanted to help. I learned demonology from a reputable demonologist. I studied, I learned, I offered all my knowledge to help others. No money needed, no fame needed, real help. I think after years of thinking about it and seeing other things, I believe they are some sort of demonic entity. Even a demonic entity cannot enter you without permission. Basically, they harass you, break you down, and convince you to let them in one way or another. I have wanted a Black Eyed Kid story for so long. I hear so many people with Black Eyed Kid stories, and they are so creepy and they're so common, and no one knows what they are, why they come, and why they always ask to come in. And if you don't let them in, they get persistent or just go away. Super creepy. If anyone else has had a Black Eyed Kid story, please send it my way.
You can't make this stuff up. Might have known the story of real life boogeyman.
Weird, spooky dating story. So, my ex boyfriend and I were together for a little over a year before I broke up with him, and to say the least, it was very toxic. I'm not going into depth about what happened in our relationship, but it was extremely unhealthy. This story is a lot to read, so get comfy and grab a snack. Anyway, I'd been on the depot shot, a birth control injection, for about 9 months before I had met my ex boyfriend. During that time, I didn't have a regular period. I would spot here and there, but nothing serious. I met Jake and immediately fell in love with him. I ignored the red flag, and there were a lot. Girl, we've all been there, unfortunately. A few hours after meeting him, I started having a very heavy flow, which was not normal for me. I brushed it off and didn't think much of it. That was a super red flag. Your body was like, do not mate with this one. A few weeks went by and I was still having this irregular bleeding. I didn't want to go to the doctor because I didn't have health insurance. It's so expensive now. But I did continue going for birth control. About a month later, I started having terrible acne. I couldn't find a way to get rid of it. I tried everything in the book. Looking back, it feels like my body was rejecting him from the start, and I had no idea for sure. About a month and a half after I broke up with him, I went to another town to party with some old friends. I ended up getting pretty drunk, having a great time, and eventually got super tired. We were all at a beautiful two-story house about 200 years old, sitting on a large piece of property roughly 20 minutes from the nearest main road. I told my friends I was going to take a 30-minute nap downstairs and that I'd be right back. They warned me not to sleep downstairs because it creeped everyone out. This house had always given me bad vibes, like something was wrong with it, like something was bad inside. I was pretty drunk and just wanted to sleep, so I went downstairs anyway. I lay on the bed on my left side and rolled over to my right to grab the blanket. As I was doing this, I entered a strange trance like state. I don't really know how to describe what happened next, so please bear with me. I fully rolled onto my left side with the blanket in my right hand tucked under my chin, with the top of the blanket halfway down my arm. I felt someone spooning me, but it wasn't warm. It was hot. Very hot. I slowly looked over my right shoulder and saw Jake's face and body turn into something demonic. While this was happening, I couldn't move my body at all. I could only move my eyes. I saw the light turn on and heard pots banging together. It was my friend trying to wake me up. I could see the room clearly, all my friends moving around and talking. Jake's eyes stayed the same, like his normal self, and I could see them out of the corner of my eye. He tilted his head up and looked at me with a stare I will never forget. He reached out and grabbed my shoulder. I saw his hand, his yellow, broken nails. He was red and bloody, and I could see every tiny detail. Then everything went black. I woke up drenched in sweat, with my friends asking if I was okay. I got up, drove home, and never went back to that house again. I haven't told any people about this because I'm terrified. I haven't been the same since. I have absolutely no feelings for this man anymore. About a week after this happened, my bleeding stopped and I haven't bled since. It's been about 2 months now and I still think about this experience every day. I can't forget it. I do believe in God and I'm open to any insight. Thanks for reading. Girl, I think you were dating a demon or he was like possessed by something because like the hot feeling and then like the yellow nails, no, and then like the way your body was like literally screaming at you for 2 weeks. I'm so glad you got away from that. That is so scary. Let me know in the comments what you guys think, or if you've ever had a creepy story where you think maybe you dated someone possessed. Let me know.
The Dark Side of Disney, What Happened to the Real Peter Pan, Part 3. This once Hollywood idol was now an ex-con and everyone knew it. The tabloids ate it up. The media made sure they let everyone know Bobby's trying to get a new start in acting, but hey, don't forget, he's a junkie, a fraud, a criminal, and an addict. And we know the media is relentless. They will bully a child star until they're in the grave and still keep pushing because they want a story. And despite getting clean and working hard on himself, when he reached out to Disney, producers, executives, and all his old friends, none of them responded back to him. And that was when it really hit Bobby that none of these people ever really even cared about him. He now felt like instead of people watching him, they were judging him. No matter how hard he tried, he just could not escape his past. That was the moment that Bobby broke down and realized he would never be an actor again. So at 25, he knew his acting career was over, and he started drifting around, couch surfing and doing little odd jobs. But when he worked as a carpenter, that was when he felt the most satisfied. It wasn't something that was going to disappear and haunt him later. These were things that he could see hold in his hands that were real, that he created. But because he was a child star, there was always something from his past lurking around, whether it was a fan, a poster, a tabloid, things to constantly remind him of what he lost. So in the mid-60s, Bobby packed a single suitcase, got on a bus, and went to New York and decided he was going to start over altogether. He grew his hair out, a beard, changed everything about himself. So he goes to New York and gets settled in, and for the first time ever, he wasn't Peter Pan, Jim Hawkins, or the kid from Treasure Island. He wasn't Disney's golden child. He was just some guy in New York. Now, Bobby didn't go to New York to be an actor. He now introduced himself as Robert, the artist. And Bobby was an amazing artist. Like, his artwork is just phenomenal. He carried around a portfolio with all his paintings and pictures and things that he created, and they were beautiful. It was dark, tense, and chaotic. You could really see his pain and trauma in his work. So Bobby gravitates towards the Lower East Side, and that's where he finds a whole new realm of people that are totally different from Hollywood. For a short time, he hung around people like Andy Warhol, who knew him for his artwork. They didn't care that he was Peter Pan. They thought it was cool that he had accomplished these things and he was such a great artist, but they didn't dwell on his past like other people did. But even in New York, he could not get away from his past or Disney. Bobby said he saw his face everywhere he went. It was on movie posters, the theaters, lunchboxes, kids' toys, t-shirts. It was everywhere, but he wasn't getting paid for it. It was a constant reminder that he failed. His body betrayed him. He was kicked out of the kingdom. He couldn't support his family. He was fired over acne. All these things piled up into one. It just overwhelmed him. Imagine spending your youth building something so big and so well known, but you're not a part of it. You're not getting paid. Hell, you're not even invited. Even though Bobby didn't have much in common with this new group of friends, what they did have in common was their drug use, and these people had plenty of drugs. And not only were they easier to find, but they were a lot more affordable here too. Bobby would once again give in to his addiction in an attempt to numb the pain. Y'all, by the age of 29, this man looked like an elderly man. His hair was falling out and was gray. He had bald spots. His teeth had completely rotted out. Anywhere there was a vein, he had track marks because he used so much. He had also become a runner for dealers, getting paid in more. So his drug use picked up even more. Sadly, by 1967, Bobby was a full-blown addict once again, and once in a while someone would recognize him like, hey, aren't you the guy from Treasure Island? They would say, oh my God, are you homeless? What happened to you? Aren't you rich? Further reminding Bobby that he was a failure. But Bobby was always nice to people, especially to his fans, no matter what they said. So by 30 years old, the former Academy Award winner was barely hanging on by a thread. He was skeletal. He would stay in abandoned buildings, sometimes on the street, and was eating out of dumpsters. So on the evening of March 30th, 1968, two little boys were rummaging around these old buildings and dumpsters, and that was when they stumbled upon a body. It was the wreckage of Peter Pan. They had found Bobby's body, but nobody knew it was Bobby at that time. The two little boys did not recognize Bobby, and neither did the police officer that they flagged down. They didn't see Bobby, who played Peter Pan, or Jim Hawkins. They seen another dead junkie. They searched Bobby's pockets, could not find a wallet, therefore they could not identify him. Bobby's body was taken to the medical examiner's office, where he put a toe tag on him that said John Doe. They had no idea they had the real-life Peter Pan laying on their table, and sadly they would not know that for years to come. The medical examiner said he can't be but 30 or 30-something years old, and his veins are petrified. He has the body of an elderly man. His cause of death was hardening of the arteries from all his past drug abuse. And y'all, this next part is just so heartbreaking. So back then, they had this place called Hart Island where they buried unknown people. There were no headstones marking their graves. We're talking about a hole full of hundreds, possibly thousands of unidentified bodies. It was a mass grave for the murdered, the addicts, stillborns, the John Does and Janes, the bodies of people who wanted to be forgotten, or the bodies of people who someone else wanted to be forgotten. There's no telling who and all's been buried there because they were never identified. But April of 1968, the prisoners who worked at that cemetery lowered Bobby's body down into a mass grave, and no one had any idea it was him. Now, before Bobby died, he would occasionally write letters with his mother and sometimes call her and ask for money, but when the letters stopped, his mother knew something was wrong. She was terrified, but she was also paralyzed by the shame and confusion that addiction brings to a family. She didn't know where he was. She knew he had gone to New York to be an artist. So his mom contacts the studio, hoping that Walt or someone can help her, but she finds out that Walt actually died back in 1966. But his mom knew Disney had the resources to find Bobby, and despite Bobby quite literally being a part of the Disney legacy, the studio and company would not help her find Bobby. Just like they had done Bobby when he tried to make amends with them, they completely ignored his mother. In their eyes, Bobby Driscoll just wasn't their problem. And as she searched for his body, Disney once again promoted the movies he had starred in and helped create. For some time, Bobby's mother kept putting articles in the paper saying, "Have you seen him? Do you know this person?" But no one ever responded back. And it wasn't until 1969 when a fingerprint finally located her son. Fingerprint records of the NYPD are vast. Matches were done manually in those days. Eyes comparing swirls and ridges and ink cards. Somewhere in the dusty archive, a clerk made a connection. The prints found from the John Doe, Bobby's remains, were finally linked to Bobby. And that's when Bobby's mother found out that her son had been buried in a mass grave, and everyone knew it. The tabloids ate it up, and there was no way to get his body back. Never took Bobby's body out of that mass grave. He's still there today. His family did get him a headstone to put on their property. Family said it never left Bobby. What hurt him the most was how Walt and his family turned their backs on him when he was just a kid, and then fired him because he had acne. It always hurt Bobby that they fired him like that and wouldn't even have a conversation with him, and then he couldn't get work elsewhere because of it. But parents need to stop thinking about the money and fame and start thinking about what this does to their children. Like I said before, Hollywood is a well-oiled machine that runs off the blood of child stars, and it never ends well for them. A large majority of their stories ended up just like Bobby's, if not worse. I had to leave out a lot of details because there's so much, but if you enjoyed this series, let me know in the comments.
So Britney Spears owned this house, believed it was haunted, and sold it with everything still inside to Brittany Murphy, who would then go on to die inside of the house. Maybe this is all just coincidence, but it's still incredibly eerie when you hear the full story. So this is the mansion that Britney Spears moved into in 2001, and according to Britney's former makeup artist, during the time that she was living there, she had some type of spiritual transformation and invited someone over who claimed to be a spiritual healer. But after this supposed spiritual healer left, something didn't feel right to her. Britney told her former makeup artist that she thought the spiritual healer may have opened some type of portal, and she claimed that there were evil spirits inside of the house trying to harm her by doing things like pushing her down the stairs. The entire situation scared Britney so badly that she left the home immediately and never returned. She then sold the house along with everything inside of it to Brittany Murphy, who would then go on to die in that house under very suspicious circumstances. Her husband Simon would also die 5 months after her in the same room. Now, after Brittany's death, Simon gave an interview stating that his wife tried to avoid the house at all costs. He said that he felt that maybe the property was unlucky, and before her death, he had planned to move his wife and his mother to New York City. Then, after Simon's death, his mother was quoted saying, "All I know is that before Simon's death, he was having hallucinations that things were crawling out of his skin." Now, a lot of people believe that this can all be attributed to toxic mold poisoning. Maybe the home was filled with black mold, which, when exposed to for a prolonged period of time, can cause hallucinations, paranoia, insomnia. It can also cause breathing problems. And the ultimate cause of Brittany and Simon's death was listed as community-acquired pneumonia. But the coroner's office said that toxic mold wasn't the case. They instead said that Brittany's death was due to an iron deficiency and intoxication from prescription medications, which likely weakened her immune system and then led to a fatal bacterial infection. Simon's cause of death was nearly identical. So if this was the case, was Britney Spears right? Was there something unexplainable inside of that house? To add on to the creepiness of this entire story, when Britney Spears lived in this house, she claimed to see the spirit of a man and a woman. Well, as we all know if you watched my previous video, because this house was so haunted, according to Britney Spears, she sold the house along with everything inside of it to Brittany Murphy, who would go on to die in that house. Her husband Simon would also die in the house in the same room 5 months later. So when I posted this video, I saw an interesting comment that makes this entire situation even creepier. If Britney Spears had been seeing what she thought was the spirit of a man and a woman inside of this house, maybe they weren't spirits haunting her. Maybe she was actually seeing a premonition of what was to come. I think this is something that's also so interesting about the case of actress Sharon Tate, who also thought that her estate was haunted because of these nightmares she kept having about being killed. And as a lot of us know, she would later become the victim of cult leader Charles Manson, which we can talk about in another video. Now, I understand that in the case of Britney Spears and Brittany Murphy, a lot of people believe that the hauntings are actually just hallucinations from mold poisoning, and this is also likely the cause of Britney and Simon's deaths. But the coroner's office found no evidence to prove that that's the case. In fact, here's an archived newspaper article from CNN that says that no mold was found in the home during inspections just 2 months prior to Britney's death. The home was demolished a few years after Britney and Simon's deaths, and this new home was built on top of where their home used to sit.
Let's read another scary Reddit story. I was 18 years old, female, when this happened. At the time, I was living at home with my parents, who had recently moved far out into the countryside. Their farm was part of a tiny rural cluster, about 7 farms on one road. That night, I was home alone with our dog, a large Labrador I was looking after until my parents came back the next day. It was around 11 p.m. I was laying on the upstairs couch with a movie playing quietly on the TV, half asleep and relaxed in the stillness of the house. Then, 3 loud knocks shattered the silence. They came from the front door downstairs, the door directly at the bottom of the staircase leading up to where I was. The sound was sharp and deliberate, not hesitant, not accidental. My dog sprang out of his bed beside me and started barking immediately. I tried to calm him, but he was beyond listening. He bolted down the stairs and positioned himself in front of the door, barking and growling into the darkness. Outside, the courtyard was completely black. I stood halfway down the staircase, my pulse hammering in my ears, and called out, "Hello?" No reply, just silence. I called again, louder this time. Still nothing. The quiet that followed felt wrong, thick and watchful. After a moment that felt much longer than it was, I forced myself to move. I stepped down the rest of the stairs, my dog still tense at the door. Carefully, I opened it just enough to lean my head outside. There was nothing there. No lights, no movement, no footsteps fading away, only the dark courtyard in the cold night air. It felt like whoever or whatever had knocked had simply vanished. I shut the door quickly and locked every entrance in the house. My hands were shaking as I called my parents. They immediately contacted our neighbors, a couple who lived nearby. Within minutes, they arrived. I explained what had happened, still trying to steady my voice. They decided to walk around the barns and check the property. Those 10 minutes felt endless. When they returned, they said they hadn't found anything. Still, they strongly suggested I come sleep in their guest room for the night. I told them it was probably just me overreacting if nothing had been found, but they kept insisting, more seriously than I expected, that it would be safer to come with them. I refused. I couldn't leave my dog. Before leaving, they told me to call immediately if anything else happened, no matter how small. When my parents returned the next day, they installed surveillance cameras outside the front door. They said it was to make me feel safer, especially since I was often home alone with the dog. A few months later, my parents were celebrating their 25th wedding anniversary. During the evening, I found myself talking with my female neighbor and thanked her again for coming over that night. Her expression shifted. She went quiet for a moment, like she was weighing whether to say what was on her mind. Then, she told me she had to be honest with me. That night, shortly before my parents called her, she had been outside saying goodnight to her horses. The yard was completely still. No wind, no distant cars, nothing. That's when she heard it. Footsteps. Clear, deliberate footsteps crunching through the gravel in our courtyard. Not random, not hurried. Slow, controlled. Like someone walking with purpose in the dark. She said the sound carried unnaturally well in the silence. Then the footsteps stopped. Right there in the yard. She waited to hear them continue, to hear someone speak, a door, anything. But there was only a heavy, suffocating silence, and just moments later, my parents called her about the knocking. She told me she never heard those footsteps leave. And that is one of the stories that's going to be on my new podcast episode that comes out tomorrow. So make sure you're following me on Spotify. And while you're at it, go ahead and follow me on YouTube too. You know, why not?
The Tall Hat Man is this entity that people often say that they see at night in the room, and they say he often resembles Abraham Lincoln. And I have heard hundreds of reports and cases of people seeing this person that they describe looking like Abraham Lincoln with a large top hat. Now, my uncle, when he was a young boy, he said he was in his room one night, and he said he woke up to like a breeze blowing in to his room, which he thought was weird because he always like kept his window closed. When he looks over at his window, he said like the curtains were kind of blowing. He looked back the other way, and then when he looked back at the window again, he said there was a tall man standing next to the window. And he said he looked just like Abraham Lincoln, except this man was actually standing through his desk. And he said this man just stared at him, and he got this big grin on his face. My uncle was like so terrified he threw the covers over his head, and then he woke up the next day, he was gone. And still to this day, he does not know who that was that he saw. This next story comes out of Virginia. There was this woman. She said that she had went to her grandmother's house when she was younger to stay for a couple weeks. And she said when she would go to her grandma's, she didn't have an extra bedroom, so she would have to sleep out on the couch. So that night, she said, she got ready to go to bed, and like she, went and laid down on the couch. And she said all of a sudden she was awoken to the sound of her grandma talking in her sleep from her bedroom. And she said she goes to her bedroom and she hears her grandma saying, "He's coming, he's coming. No, he's coming." And she is like, "Grandma, you okay? Grandma, you okay?" Her grandma, was just sleeping. So she's like, she must be having a bad dream or whatever. She goes back to her couch, she lays down, and she said, she finally fell asleep. Well, she has this dream. And she says in this dream, she is outside of the house, which happens to be near the woods. And she starts walking through the woods. And she says as she's walking through the woods, she keeps hearing someone chanting, "He's coming, he's coming." And she said it just kept getting louder and louder. And she said all of a sudden she found herself back at her grandma's house. She goes up to the back door, and she said she walked inside to the living room. And she said she could see a man standing next to her on the couch, dressed like Abraham Lincoln, with this big, tall top hat. And she said he was just staring at her. She woke up immediately after this, and she said she looked around the room. She didn't see anything. She said the next day, in the morning, her grandma tells her, "I had the craziest dream." And she said, "Well, what's that, Grandma?" She said, "I dreamt that some man was staring at you on the couch in this tall black hat." Why don't people talk more about the Four Corners region? When you think about it, that is probably the most supernatural place in all of the world. On one side in Arizona, you have the Navajo Reservation, where a lot of strange things happen. In New Mexico, you have Dulce. You have the infamous Route 666. In Colorado, you have Mesa Verde. And in Utah, you have places like the Skinwalker Ranch. In this section of area, there are so many strange and creepy things that happen. Now, there was this trucker. He was driving on the infamous Route 666. He found himself headed north towards Farmington. He said as he's driving, he began to get this weird feeling. He said that the car just felt kind of staticky. He said as he drove down this road, he started to notice something up in the roadway. And as he slowed the truck down, he could see it was a person. It was a young girl, probably 12, 13. She was standing in the middle of the road. So finally the truck comes to a stop. And he gets out. And he starts yelling at this young girl, "What are you doing out on the road? You're going to get hit. Like, why are you out here alone? Where's your parents?" She doesn't say anything. She's just turned around looking in the opposite direction. He said, "I said, like, where are your parents? Like, why aren't you listening? You're not supposed to be in the middle of the road." All of a sudden, she turns around. And when she fully gets to the direction he's looking, he can see she doesn't have a face. He said this girl just started walking backwards and walked all the way into the desert and then just disappeared. He ran, he jumped back in his truck, and he took off. And he sped all the way to Farmington. And he said one of the weird things that also occurred after he'd seen this girl was the radio station kept going in and out, and he would get the static, and he would hear like voices, like people were talking that weren't supposed to be there. There was another story out of Shiprock. There was this man. He believed at the time that his wife might have been cheating on him. So he said, every night she would get up and he would hear her get up and leave the house and go somewhere. And he didn't know where she was going. So this particular night, he's laying in bed, his eyes are closed. He hears her get up out of the bed. And he hears her go downstairs and go out the door. Well, at the time, he just wanted to wait to make sure she fully left. So he kept his eyes closed and pretended like he was asleep. And finally, once he heard the door shut, he opens his eyes. And when he looks, his wife is sleeping right next to him. But then all of a sudden, he hears the door open again. He hears footsteps coming up the stairs. And he says he sees this creature come through the doorway and crawl into his wife's body. And he didn't say anything, he didn't scream. But the next day, he started to feel very sick. And over the next couple of weeks, he got very, very ill. And eventually, he passed away. And a lot of people attributed that to the fact that he witnessed his wife, right, this creature coming into her body. When we think of vampires, we think of New Orleans. But the Appalachian vampire is the original American vampire. Now, what people don't understand is in the 1900s, there were Romanian immigrants who came to the Appalachian Mountains because it reminded them very much of the Carpathian Mountains. And they brought with them this lore of vampirism. Now, this story comes out of Winston-Salem, North Carolina. There was a girl named Kira. Now, Kira said that she happened to be downtown one night with her friends, and they were at this nightclub. She said, she was dancing, having a good time, when out of the corner of her eye, she spots this man standing by the bar. And she said he had this beautiful curly brown hair, and he had bright blue eyes, and she said, he was just like almost perfect looking. Well, she said, when she was dancing with her friends and she was talking with them, all she could do was focus on this guy. Eventually, she said something was compelling her to go over and talk to him. So she walks over to this guy and she goes, "Hi, I'm Kira. How are you? Where are you from?" He doesn't say anything. She keeps trying to talk to him, but he's not speaking. So she goes, "You don't really talk that much." And this guy then proceeds to grab her hands. And she said when she felt his hands, they were ice cold. And as she looked upon his eyes, she said there was this blank stare. And she said it looked like he was empty inside. And right at that moment, she has this vision of a woman screaming, and this guy is chasing her. Well, all of a sudden, she kind of snaps out of it, and she backs up a little bit and is kind of freaked out now. This guy looks at her and says, "What do you think of me?" And she says, "Well, to be honest with you, I think you're a little creepy now." And he goes, "I'm sorry. I'm still trying to learn to be human." And she said the next thing she knew, she felt something telling her to go outside. So she started to walk out the front door. She goes down the road and she goes into this back alley. This guy follows her out. She said this guy came up right next to her, and next thing she knows, she's kissing this guy. And she said it was getting very passionate when all of a sudden he starts getting very aggressive. And she said he was grabbing her arm so hard he could feel the nails going into her skin. And she said, at this point she became terrified and started freaking out when she hears her friends say, "Kara, are you all right? Is everything okay? What's going on?" She turns, she takes off running to her friends. She's all frantic. And she says, "This man I met at the bar, he was trying to attack me out in the alley." Her friends just kind of look at her like she's crazy. And she's like, "What are you, you don't believe me? There seriously was this guy." And they're like, "Kira, you were over by the bar alone. And you were talking to someone who there was no one there. And you walked out of the door alone. And you walked into the alley alone. There was no one with you." And she's like, "No, what are you talking about? He was there. He's real." And her friends are like, "Look, you've had too much to drink. We're going to take you back home so you can get some sleep." So she said she went home and she started to think, maybe it was me drinking too much. Maybe I just imagined this. Until she goes into the bathroom and she sees these scratch marks on her arm. Now, this next story takes place in Atlanta, Georgia. There was this man named Marcus. Now, Marcus said that he grew up in sort of a bad part of Atlanta. And he said, he was in a lot of trouble and wasn't on the up and up. Well, he said this particular night, him and his group of friends, they're hanging outside of their house. They're listening to music. And he said it was probably about 11 o'clock. So that's when all of a sudden it just got eerily quiet. And he said the next thing he knows, they see this white guy walking down the block. they said just something seemed like really off with him, but also like this looked like a guy that wouldn't be in that neighborhood. So normally they would go up to him and they'd be like, hey, what are you doing in this part of town? And call him out and stuff. But they said they felt like they were in some sort of trance. And this guy makes it all the way to the driveway. He turns and he walks right up to them. And Marcus said he stopped, right next to him. And his eyes were fixated on this one guy who they called Shorty G. And they said this whole time as he stood there, he just was staring straight at Shorty G. Well, this guy walks over to Shorty G. He taps his face and he says, "It's a nice night, isn't it?" And he turns and he walks away. Well, after this guy leaves, Marcus and his friends are kind of like fighting amongst each other. Like, why didn't you say something? Why did you let him punk you? Like, what's going on? And this whole time, they said Shorty G is just standing there like something was bothering him, like he was terrified or he had seen something. And he said, the rest of the night, Shorty G didn't say anything. And then finally he said, you know what, I'm going to go home. Like, I'm going to leave. I'll catch you later. So he walks back to his house, and the next day they're getting ready to all hang out. Shorty G doesn't show up. So they go to his grandma's house. They knock on the door. And the grandma's like, Shorty G never came home last night. I thought he was with you guys. And they're like, no, he said he was going home. For 3 days, they searched for Shorty G. They couldn't find him anywhere. And he said after about a week, they realized he was probably gone. And he said, at this time, they did not call the police. They handled things on their own because they did not want the police in the area. So he said he never heard from Shorty G again. Now, this next story takes place in West Virginia. There was this girl named Caitlin. Caitlin said that her grandmother came over from Romania. And she said she remembered this family story, that when her grandmother was younger, her brother was unalived by someone, and they never were able to figure out who did it. And she said they buried him in a local cemetery. Fast forward many years later, they said, that they wanted to bring this case back up, and they'd found some new evidence. So when they went to bring up the body, they could not find one. And the grandmother said they never found out what happened to him. Well, fast forward, now her brother's daughter at the time, she now has a daughter. And her daughter was like 9 years old. Well, she's at home one night, and her daughter goes into the kitchen, and she said she sees this man standing next to the kitchen table. And she said he had a brown hat. He had this brown jacket on with some, 70s looking jeans. And she said the guy looked at her and said, "Don't you recognize me? I'm your grandfather." He turned and then walked out the back door. Well, she runs into her mother's room and she's screaming. And she starts telling her mother, like, "Hey, someone was in the house. There was this guy and he was in the kitchen." And her mom's like, "Well, what did he look like?" She starts describing him, and instantly she starts crying because she goes, "That was my dad. That was your grandfather that you've seen." And her grandmother always said that in her country, they believed that sometimes people would come back from the grave, and they called them vampires.
What is going on with this Nancy Guthrie case? I'm going to be honest, I haven't followed it at all until today, and it is weird. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old and she's from Tucson, Arizona. Her daughter is Savannah Guthrie, who hosts the Today Show. I believe that's correct. Correct me if I'm wrong. She was last seen on February 1st. She went to dinner that night at her daughter's home, Ann Guthrie, in Tucson, Arizona. She was dropped off at her own residence at 9:45 that evening. Surveillance videos does show her closing her garage door at about 9:50 that night. At about 1:47 in the morning, Nancy's doorbell camera was disconnected. 25 minutes later, surveillance software detected movement around her home. Now, the doorbell camera she didn't have a subscription for it, so it wasn't recording and logging movement. Nancy had a pacemaker and it disconnected from the monitoring app that she had on her phone at about 2:28 in the morning. But it wouldn't be until the next morning that people started getting worried. She would normally log on to church on every Sunday morning, but that morning her friends didn't see her. She didn't log on. They couldn't get a hold of her or nothing, so they finally called her family. A 911 call was placed at 12:03 p.m. Deputies arrived at 12:15, and it was really apparent that something strange had happened. At first, they thought that maybe this was just a missing persons case, but it would quickly escalate when they found blood on her front porch. This is when they realized that she had more than likely been abducted. Just 3 days after she was reported missing, several media outlets started reporting that they had received ransom letter demands asking for millions of dollars in Bitcoin exchange for her safe return. It would be that same week that Savannah and her siblings would go on air begging for their mother's return. They just wanted her home safe. As the deadlines for these ransoms were getting closer, her family went online and started asking for communication for whoever had taken her. News stations, including KOLD and KGUN, these are local news stations, they also reported getting more ransom letters demanding $6 million, and they threatened Nancy's life if the payment was not made by February 9th at 5 p.m. Again, Nancy's family went online and said, "Hey, we are willing to pay this if you just to bring our mother home." It would be 10 days later that Kash Patel told news outlets that they had actually been able to get the Ring surveillance footage from the Ring doorbell, even though there was no subscription being paid to save the data. But they said that they were able to get the video from residual back end data tied to the device. The video is weird. I am not going to lie. You can see the person in the surveillance footage, and then they start like moving plants in front of the Ring doorbell as if they're trying to like block the footage. I don't know. This surveillance footage is really chilling. There are several online conspiracy theories about who this person is, but I don't feel comfortable going into them here because nothing's been confirmed or even speculated by authorities at this point. Now, that same day, the police officers came forward and said that they had detained someone during a traffic stop in Rio Rico, which is about 60 miles south of Tucson. The person that was detained for this was later released without charges. His name was Carlos, and I'm going to say his last name wrong. Correct me down in the comments, but it's Carlos Palazuelos. And he identified himself later, saying that he worked as a delivery driver in Tucson and he was pulled over while his wife was driving. Now, he said that law enforcement had been watching his vehicle prior to the stop and that he had no knowledge of what happened to Nancy. Police officers did search both of his vehicles and his house, and the search would conclude at about 1 a.m. local time. Kash Patel again went on to Hannity, and he said that they were examining multiple persons of interest, but it doesn't appear as if anything has come from this. On the same day that this video was released, a small Bitcoin transaction of about $152 was sent to one of the digital wallets that was in association with one of the ransom notes. But no one has confirmed if this means anything as far as Nancy's investigation. So I don't know what's going on. Police do say that they're looking at multiple suspects at this point, but it's just weird. The whole case is very weird. Investigators say that they're now just fully looking for Nancy and they want answers for her family. I can imagine how terrified they are, but the FBI tip line, if you do have any information, is 1-800-CALL-FBI. So, what are your thoughts on this case? Let me know down in the comments and follow for more true crime.
I need to tell you guys this ghost story. The story was sent into my email, and for full transparency, it is more alleged true crime than it is a ghost story, but it is still scary nonetheless. There are trigger warnings for this, so please check out the description before watching. If you have any paranormal experiences, ghost stories, or scary stories that you'd like for me to share, you can send them to the email in my bio. And I have paraphrased this for storytelling reasons. This isn't just a ghost story. It's a family story, and it's one that just still doesn't make sense to us. My mother grew up as the oldest sibling. She had a younger brother that wasn't very much younger than her, and their childhood was ruled by fear. Their father was deeply involved in local crime in a small southern town. He was known for violence towards my grandmother, towards others, and even towards his own children. He believed cruelty made people stronger. He did unspeakable things to my uncle in order to, quote-unquote, toughen him up. He was accused of murdering people, and one of his strangest details is that he kept dozens of carrier pigeons. He used them to send messages, and if a bird didn't perform the way he wanted, well, eventually my grandmother found the courage to leave. She divorced him and tried to start over, working quietly in a beauty salon. He remarried, shockingly, to her own cousin. For a while, it seemed like she might finally be safe, until one night, when he broke into her apartment. He had hid in her closet for hours, waiting for her to get home. When she finally came home from work, he attacked her. Her face was left unrecognizable. The only reason she survived was because someone was able to call the police in time. Later, she said that the only thing she remembered was a police officer holding her, telling her that she was safe. She asked for his name, and he said it was Frank, but his nickname was Angel. She had to spend weeks in the hospital, and somehow, despite everything, her ex-husband was released on bond. Not long after, he invited my mother over. I was 8 months old at the time, and that was the first and only time he ever saw me. During that visit, he begged my mother to help get the charges dropped. She didn't. She couldn't. The state had already taken over the case, and we left. Then he sat alone at his kitchen table, and, according to the official story, he used a shotgun and took his own life. But there's a problem. He was born with only one hand. The report said he took his life with his right hand, the one he didn't have. The position described would have been nearly impossible. Then there was the autopsy. It listed details my grandmother knew were wrong. Things about his body that didn't match who he was. When my mother went to identify him, she said there was barely anything left to recognize at all. At the funeral, the casket was closed. They said that the body just wasn't ready in time. My mother ended up going to the police with her concerns, and the sheriff looked at her and said, "Go home. Try not to remember any of this." Years later, when I was 29, my uncle told me something chilling. He believes that my grandfather never died, that he faked his death and escaped, fled prosecution, and left the country. And my mother? Well, she goes back and forth, but sometimes she's admitted she believes it too. I need to tell you guys this ghost story. The story isn't just one moment. It stretches across years of my life, and the longer it went on, the harder it became to ignore. My dad bought the building in 2008. 2 stories, solid sandstone, old enough that it had already lived several lives before we ever stepped inside of it. At different points, it had been an inn, a gas station, a Mexican restaurant, and eventually a residence. The owners used to live upstairs while running their business below. There was a story attached to it too. I was told that sometime in the 1970s, a gay man lived there during the restaurant years. When the town found out, the ridicule was relentless. Not long after, he took his own life. I don't know all the details. I just know the story never left the building. By 2010, my family moved into the upstairs apartment. It had just been renovated. One massive open room that served as a bedroom, living room, and dining room all in one. A single wall cut off a cramped kitchen and bathroom. As a kid, I didn't experience much. Sometimes the place felt off, heavy, but nothing I couldn't shrug away. My mom, however, didn't have that luxury. One night, she woke up completely alert. No dream, no noise, just awake. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. She later told me it felt like something dark was pressing down on her, filling the room. When it finally lifted, she gasped for air like she'd been underwater. In 2014, we moved out. My dad kept his shop downstairs and I worked for him. One afternoon, I got exhausted and went upstairs to nap on the old mattress we'd left behind. I laid down on my stomach. When I woke up, all 4 of my limbs were stretched outward, like they'd been pulled to the corners. I was paralyzed. My wrists and ankles felt pinned, heavy pressure holding me in place. My body buzzed with that electric, half-awake sensation. Then I heard chanting, soft, faint, right behind my head. All I know is that it wasn't English. When the paralysis broke, I didn't run. I just lay there, staring at the walls, waiting for my heart to slow down. Then I got up and left. Over the years, different people lived upstairs. A friend once stayed there and immediately said, "This place is haunted." She didn't even have stories, just a feeling she couldn't explain. Then my uncle moved in. He worked for my dad, but he was miserable. Eventually, he took his own life, 10 miles away, on the side of the highway. When we went back to the apartment afterwards, the air felt wrong, dense. The laptop he'd left behind was open, showing a diagram of a heart. In 2018, my partner and I moved into the apartment. The noises started first. Easy to dismiss, old building, settling walls. But on our very first night, we both had dreams about taking our own lives. Mine was violent. Hers was quiet and terrifying. In her dream, she realized she was dead and no one could hear her. Then, eventually, we got a cat. Almost immediately, she became obsessed with one corner of the apartment, an open closet near the bathroom. She'd freeze, puff up, turn sideways, staring into open space. It happened over and over again. One morning while I slept, my partner went to the bathroom. Suddenly, our cat screamed. Not a yowl, not a hiss, something primal. My partner thought she'd been gravely injured, and she rushed out and couldn't find her. Eventually, she found our cat hiding behind the microwave, shaking. We started praying over the apartment, but the heaviness stayed. And one night, the man renting the downstairs, Jeff, came outside to talk. Completely unprompted, he asked if we had any weird stuff going on upstairs. He told us that he'd watch us leave, and then he'd hear heavy footsteps pacing above him. Not cat footsteps, heavy adult footsteps. He also said he'd seen a black figure moving inside his space when no one else was there. Years later, someone else moved in. Without knowing any of this, she told me that she hated being alone there. I asked her where she felt most uncomfortable. The corner, the closet, by the bathroom. That corner has never changed, and that's the part I can't explain. I need to tell you guys this ghost story. Back in the early 2000s, I lived in San Francisco with my boyfriend at the time. The apartment we lived in wasn't really an apartment. It was an old hotel that had been converted into units, and you could feel the history the second you stepped inside. The layout alone was unsettling. The bathroom sat raised in the middle of the space like a platform. Underneath it were these old roll-out beds, molly beds, that slid out at night and disappeared during the day. When we slept, we'd pull out the bed so that it ran parallel to the large window that faced the neighboring building. The city light always came in strange through those windows. One night, the moonlight was unusually bright, bright enough to feel intentional, like it was searching the room. I woke up suddenly, and at that exact same moment, my boyfriend jolted awake too. No noise, no reason, just the both of us snapping into consciousness. We stared at each other in silence. I remember feeling unsettled, but I couldn't explain why. Nothing was there. The room looked the same as always. The next morning, he told me about his dream. He said he'd woken from a nightmare so vivid it didn't feel like a dream at all. An old woman had been standing over him. She was balding, with long, stringy white hair hanging down around her face. Her expression wasn't neutral. It was angry, hateful, and focused. He said she leaned over him and tried to pull something out of him, his energy, his life, like she needed it. When he woke up, he felt completely drained, not shaken, just exhausted, like something had taken from him. At the time, I brushed it off. I wasn't a ghost person. I told myself it was stress, weird dreams, San Francisco vibes. I even joked that he was being very Santa Cruz about it. A few months later, my mom came to visit. She slept in the other molly bed, in the adjacent space. The next day, we got into a massive fight, completely out of character for us. It was irrational and explosive, and she packed up and left early. Because of that fight, we didn't speak for almost a year. At the time, I blamed hormones, tension, bad timing. I never told her about my boyfriend's nightmare. It wasn't something I would have shared back then. Fast forward 15 years. My mom and I were reminiscing. Old apartments, bad boyfriends, places I'd lived. I mentioned that San Francisco apartment casually, and she froze. "Oh my God," she said. "That place was haunted." Then she told me about her dream. She said she'd had the most terrifying nightmare of her life. An old woman, balding, long, stringy, white hair. The woman was trying to kill her. In the dream, my mom was on the floor, even though she'd actually been sleeping in the bed, and the woman had her foot pressed down on my mom's throat, choking her as hard as she could. My mom said she woke up gasping for air. Her throat hurt. She genuinely felt like she had been strangled. She told me that besides the fight, that was why she had left early. She didn't want to spend another night in that apartment. As she spoke, my entire body went cold. The worst part wasn't that they had both had nightmares. It was how specific they were. The same woman, the same hair, the same hostility, the same physical sensation of being drained and attacked. Two people, years apart. No shared conversation. I still don't have an explanation. I'm not someone who jumps to the paranormal, but I also can't deny how identical those descriptions were. The only other thing I remember about that apartment was a feeling I could never quite name. When I was alone, reading, sitting quietly, I always felt watched. Not aggressively, but not kindly either. Best way I can describe it is like being in a dentist's waiting room. You can tell people are looking at you, but you don't know why. It made the loneliness heavier. And I hated the basement. Going down there to do laundry felt wrong, like stepping somewhere you weren't supposed to linger. I don't know what was in that building, but if you've ever lived on Pine Street between Hyde and Larkin, you know exactly what I'm talking about.